Greetings, channel members, and today we're going to discuss the aspects of folklore. One of the stories that often comes up with folklore that people don't know the origin of concerns the story of the whistle. In the story of the whistle, it involves an elderly woman who's living on her own after her father passed away on an isolated farm. Some people say that this aspect of folklore emanates from Appalachia, South Carolina. It doesn't really matter where. And in the story, she hears a whistle approach, and this woman lives on her own on an old farm, and the only animal left with her is her German shepherd. And slowly, she hears the whistle approaching, and she's not exactly sure what it is. She's not sure if it's some sort of animal or if it's children that are simply fooling around. And the whistle gets closer and closer, and gradually the tension builds. Suddenly the whistle becomes so loud that she's not even certain what it represents. She's not certain if it's some sort of other entity or otherworldly power that may be descending upon her farm. And yet the sense of dread and tension continues to increase. Now, I thought about actually relaying this tale to you exactly as it's written down, but I figured I would just talk about folklore first in this exploration prior to actually reading folklore. In fact, what I'd encourage you to do is read folklore on your own, because the beauty about it is there's so many different dimensions and dynamics to folklore. Now you're probably wondering, okay, get to the point, Aurelian. You started this story and now you're broke off from it? Finish it. Very well. So the story goes on that the whistle approaches her house and gets even closer. And in fact, it gets so loud that it becomes deafening to her. And she suddenly hears the whistle go around the backside of her farmhouse. And so she leaves the German shepherd out in the back porch. And suddenly she hears a terrifying struggle, screams and cries, and the dog fighting some unknown entity. Eventually the signs of struggle and the sounds stop, and she goes to sleep for the evening, not wanting to check what happened, saying her prayers. And when she wakes up and goes to check her back porch in the morning, just nothing but blood, the entire back porch covered with blood, and no sign of the dog. And that's one of the folklore tales that still remain with us in certain locations. What exactly is folklore, and why is it important to us? Officially, they define folklore as oral traditions of different peoples and cultures across the land, and they can represent different origins and different explanations for why there's certain events that came to be the way that they are. One of the reasons that I put a priority and a focus in studying folklore is I believe there's a lot more, how shall we say, genuine authenticity with many of the accounts. Now you might be asking, well, wait a minute, Aurelian, are you actually saying that you think that some elements of this old woman's story, or the story of this old woman in Appalachia or South Carolina or wherever it came from, has some truth to it? Absolutely. I believe one of the reasons that these stories do have truth to them, and you might recall that in the recent live stream explorations that we did before my departure, we considered many of the elements of origins with these stories. Indeed, some people would say that the story of the Night Thing, or the Devil's Footprints, as it's been changed to in the latter portion of the 20th century and the early 21st century, that's actually folklore from the United Kingdom, from England. But oddly enough, you can find accounts of folklore from every culture across the land. There's Jewish folklore, there's British folklore, there's Appalachian folklore. There's even the folklore that involves the tale of a star fort falling under siege by some unknown terrifying force. Yes, you've probably never heard this particular folklore. And when you start to step back and you pay attention to some of the details in the folklore, you realize there seems to be elements of it that can only make sense if they're talking about an entirely different land or a different form of reality than we can imagine. Now, the mainstream will simply explain this away by saying once again that this is merely the product of the wild imaginations of a superstitious people who were not properly educated. Of course, and they'll also tell us that these people were so unbelievably brilliant that they could overcome the limitations of logistics and other challenges at the time when they were settling a nation, such as the United States in the 1800s. But why am I referring to folklore? One of the most interesting aspects of folklore that I've studied is Native American folklore. And indeed, there are a lot of questions that you've probably seen on many of the videos that people seem to think that the real stopping point towards any sort of pre-existing unknown civilization revolves around the fact that the Native Americans would be well aware that there was a civilization and they would tell us about it. Well, actually, they do tell us about it. But one of the explanations that I've had, and you probably recall in the Reset War video, is the fact that the Native Americans went through the reset just like everybody else did. And it is a fact to say that every single Native American was at one point confined to the reservation. They all went through the reservation system. And then their children during that time frame went through the education system. And so really, do we have anything more to say about indoctrination? However, Native Americans have retained some elements of their cultural identity, and that tends to survive in their folklore. Now, what I'll give them full credit on is that they don't just simply share their folklore with anybody. They keep it very close to the chest, proverbially speaking. And you can come around as a journalist or even someone who claims to be acting in their interest, and they're not just going to share the story with you. And I think anybody can understand why they have a lot of lack of trust towards certain institutions, and they seem to be quite wise in this respect. So, how exactly do you learn some of the accounts of their folklore? Well, some of it is published, and you can do a little research on your own and find some of the accounts of Native American folklore, and you also have to apply your own intuition, because you'll find that when you read it, as opposed to if you actually sit down with a tribal elder and have them regale the story to you, it's night and day different. And so what's really going on with it? Well, the challenges with folklore is that folklore seems to have been suppressed. And not only that, but much like with everything else, you know how I joke about historical revision, there is a revision that applies to folklore as well. The original elements of folklore have been pulled out of the story. And the reason that I told you the summary of the folklore tale of the whistle, which does allegedly emanate from Appalachia, United States, or the mountain area that runs all the way from Georgia. Originally, you could argue up to Maine, although it depends on where you assess the Appalachians ending, and that's a subject for debate. But these stories give you an entirely different inclination of a different sort of existence. And indeed, many of the details that have been omitted or removed from the whistle actually gives you an impression of something very different going on. It's as though the people that were living through that time were living through a very challenging time. And indeed, there is a very detailed account in terms of what the whistle actually is, or rather, what the entity is that is terrifying that old woman in that tale. And the original folklore says that that entity was actually a creature that was created to terrorize the population. Now, I know what you're saying. How can you prove that there's been folklore that's been modified or altered or has significant portions of it that have been truncated or censored? Well, you can actually find numerous examples of our own historical works, our works of fiction, our works of literature that have been censored and edited over the years. Perhaps if any of you are familiar with Aleister Crowley, you try finding original copies of his books, and that's quite a daunting challenge. Now, of course, people always want to take a very hard-line approach to certain things, and perhaps your life is guided by dogma of some sort, or maybe by institutions, and it's not my place to say in terms of where your baseline values come from. But when you step back and you look at all this folklore objectively, what you'll notice is there are some very common themes that run across all these supposed cultural boundaries. And one of these themes really does indicate a land, a world, however you want to think of it, as very different than the one that we know of today. Whether you're looking at Native American folklore, Appalachian folklore, Jewish folklore, British folklore, German folklore, Russian folklore, Chinese folklore, yes, just about every single culture has folklore. All folklore really is oral traditions that are passed down. You will find that there are many commonalities from this time frame that we're not supposed to speak of. And some of these commonalities include an entire world-altering event. Indeed, everyone always talks about the flood myth that's prevalent across the land, and indeed, the only culture they say that doesn't have a flood myth is Japan. Although, oddly enough, if you look far enough, you will find older oral traditions that have been suppressed from Japan that do indicate there was a flood myth there as well. And so, Are these just a common aspect of different cultures that supposedly developed independently of one another, that supposedly independently developed their own languages and indeed their own inflections in speaking those languages? And I always like to comment about the fact that there's 160 known or recognized dialects of English alone. But is that really all there is? It's always interesting when people actually try to use language and the ability to convey meaning as a means of control. And indeed, people do that all the time because that's actually an indoctrination step. And if you're going to control what people talk about, what people think about, and what they share, then you need to focus them on pointless little rules that don't really revolve around what the true intention of language actually is. And what is the true intention of language? It's to communicate meaning. And so that's why I actually find a lot of legitimacy and authenticity in these original oral traditions. This tale that you have of a star fort that's under siege by this horrific existential terror, creatures that are beyond imagination, is quite a compelling tale. And yet it does actually survive in many different forms of fiction. Perhaps if you're a reader of J.R.R. Tolkien, you might notice that the particular account of a fortress being besieged is regaled in the Siege and Fall of Gondolin. Indeed, it's a tragic tale. But you can find the origins from folklore that's even from before when Tolkien supposedly wrote the story. So what to make of all of it? Well, in this last year I've found that entertainment has been, how shall I say, not exactly something that I've sought out on my own interest. As those of you who've watched the channel for a while know, I used to work in a video store and I used to be quite a self-admitted cinephile. I loved going to the movies. In fact, I can recall a time when I would go to the movies every single weekend. And this year I've only seen one film in theaters. Dune. Not the new Dune, but the original Dune from David Lynch in 1984. A movie that I've admitted to all of you is edited and, quite frankly, an almost incomprehensible movie. And yet I'm going to see that because I missed the opportunity to see it in theaters back in 1984. So yes, here I am admitting to you that I went to go see a film that came out 40 years ago, and that's been the only film I've seen in theaters in 2024. So why am I sharing this with you all? Because if you're looking for a different form of not just entertainment, but potentially information, I would strongly recommend reading tales of folklore. And there are recorded tales that you can actually look into, and you can ascertain based on your own intuition, have a lot of elements of truth to them. What I can say about the recorded tales of folklore is that they've only had details removed from them, but the basic stories tend to remain the same. Now, you'll probably find if you do a search on your own about the story of the whistle, it's very, very difficult to locate. It used to be much more prevalent and mentioned in many more novels and books in the previous 100 years, although whatever we try to determine the breakdown of time being now, it's very difficult to determine exactly what year it is, as I've said. Indeed, the actual chronology is something that's imposed upon us, much like the rules of language and the rules of dialect and the interesting focus on pronunciations and all these other elements of language that we're supposed to pay so much attention to. Paying excessive attention to details so that we miss the important, larger, grand-scale events that you'll find in the folklore. Even the edited versions point to events that can give you much greater clues to what may have happened in the past. And as I've said many times on the channel, I put more genuine assessment, believing that a lot of the events in folklore have a lot more truth behind them than we'd like to believe. Imagine if you have this entire society or this civilization that's been completely destroyed or has collapsed, and someone's trying to rebuild things, someone's trying to put things back together. When you look at a lot of these tales of the folklore, it does give you these origin stories in terms of how the people were trying to rebuild and all the challenges that they faced. And indeed, many of the creatures or existential entities that are referred to in these tales of folklore, they make a lot more sense if you look into concerning where they may have fallen in as being creatures that were unleashed on the previous civilization with the intention of destroying it. Because if you imagine some sort of entity that can emanate a whistle and move silently and quickly through the brush, and yet it can inflict terror on its victims, it's not just about simply killing, it's also about psychological control. And we think about how many elements of psychological control persist in our current civilization to this day. Of course, these are all things that we're not supposed to think about. These are things that we're not supposed to consider outside of the boundaries that we're given. For example, you are told every day exactly what's important, and then you're told every day what you're supposed to think about what's important. Every single day, the media tells you that your own individual pursuits are selfish or narcissistic, and so therefore you should not focus on yourself. You should focus on grander goals of society. Now, that is a noble pursuit, but when they're given to you, when your entire identity is given to you, then what difference does it make? Suddenly you have lost the balance between the individual and the collective, and you've now simply become a tool of the institution, which is not very hard to display or prove is what's going on every single day. Whether you're reading any sort of publications from the media or any sort of official government publications, you might notice they tend to be very convoluted. And that's the whole intention. You can use the simple aspects of fear and confusion, and you'll induce total obedience within the population. And that's exactly the goal behind it. What you can achieve, though, by stepping back and looking into folklore on your own, not only will you find stories that actually have a little bit more of an entertaining aspect to them, but you'll also find a possible series of clues that gives you an idea of what the world really looked like between the last reset and this current civilization. It'll give you more clues in terms of what may have happened. Now, you can certainly say that I'm just completely off my rocker, I have no idea what I'm talking about, and perhaps I shouldn't be sharing these things with you. And you may be absolutely right. You should come to your own conclusions. But I challenge you to look at a few different articles of folklore. And it doesn't matter what culture you decide to read it from. I just simply suggest that you read many different cultures' folklores and see what sort of commonalities, what sort of themes within the various folklores that you'll get. What are they really saying? What are they really indicating? And why is it so important that what they're saying has so many connections to the alternative research that we do on this channel? And as I've said, the most compelling folklore that I've come across tends to be the folklore of Native Americans. And why is that? Because there seems to have been a very obvious effort to suppress this folklore. And indeed, many of those traditions have been targeted, and not just in the past, but you could even make the argument that that targeting is continuing to this day. And perhaps one of the best ways to understand exactly the kind of tricks, or dare I say the approaches that are used to control our perceptions. There is a film from the early 1990s called Thunderheart, starring Val Kilmer, and what it really gives you the concept of is exactly how our current civilization tries to suppress and sweep away any of the remnants of the old world. And indeed, you'll see and understand the very struggles that many Native Americans undergo living under a system that supposedly is for their benefit. But as always, I leave it to you. What are your thoughts on this exploration, and would you like me to explore folklore more? Well, thank you for joining me.
Definition of a scientist: a man who understood nothing until there was nothing left to understand. Now once more I must ride with my knights to defend what was and the dream of what could be.
The Mojave. A very romantic desert. Romantic, at least in the way that deserts are said to be romantic. It's said that many individuals have been created or forged in the fire of this desert. Perhaps it's even a place where someone like Lucius Aurelian was truly born. There are many mysteries that surround the Mojave. The unique composition of the land, the arid environment, the infinite vistas into the horizon, where you can see roads and terrain that has many different appearances. It's said that this land can have a strange effect on the mind. What's the real secret behind its mysteries? What sort of interests will we find in the Mojave that assists us in our quest to find answers to a previous civilization? We have many accounts of legends of cities beneath this infinite desert. Different accounts of legends that match what we've heard about in the Grand Canyon. Today we explore these legends, these myths, and these realities of the Mojave. So let's get an idea of where exactly the Mojave is located. So we're in the western United States, Southern California to be specific, which is where the majority of the Mojave is located. Technically, a little bit of it borders Nevada, all the different ways to pronounce even one state. I always enjoyed it when people gave me a hard time about how I pronounced that. In any event, there are many unique locations within the Mojave, but let's take a look at the aerial imagery. And while this is not real, we get in a little closer, and we start to get actual aerial imagery. I think we've reached it there. And you can see what it is. It's really just a series of deserts and mountains and arid land and yet odd patterns. Everything about it is strange and unique. Such as this location here, the Shadow Mountains. The Shadow Mountains simply being out in the middle of nowhere. And perhaps the most unique aspect about the Mojave is many people from Los Angeles drive through it every single weekend when they go to Las Vegas. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the area, Interstate 15 is the most dangerous roadway and section of roadway to drive on in the United States. There is no other highway except for perhaps what's jokingly referred to as the Dixie Highway in Kentucky, Highway 31 West, that has anywhere near the number of deaths from automobile accidents. And why is that? Well, because I-15 runs from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. There's really no speed limit on it. I mean, there is a speed limit, but let's be honest. You have people driving as fast as they can to get to Vegas on Friday, and then driving as fast as they can to get back to Los Angeles on Sunday evening or Monday morning, whatever the case may be. In simple terms, you don't ever try to traverse I-15 on a Friday or on a Sunday, depending which way you're going. What's also interesting is that on holidays, it's just as impassable, especially Thanksgiving and after Thanksgiving. And you would think that California would maybe want to build some sort of way to undercut this traffic, such as their own gambling facility in Barstow or something to the effect. But they have no desire to do so. They simply have a high state gas tax, and that's how they make the most of all of their residents in Los Angeles going to Las Vegas every weekend. Back to the Mojave, though. Little known fact is that right in the middle of the Mojave, you have a military base, Army Base Fort Irwin, also known as the National Training Center. The National Training Center, considered the jewel of the Army, it's where the United States Army conducts its major maneuver exercises for its Armored Brigade combat teams. Tanks and armored fighting vehicles of every sort are employed there. Entire brigades will send all their combat vehicles by rail and then het them or heavy equipment transport them on this road up to Fort Irwin. The terrain here is very interesting, and it's good desert terrain, although there's a lot of environmental regulations that the United States Army has to abide by. Some of the points of interest, though, is not only do you have Fort Irwin, this very isolated army post, which is a good 40 miles from the nearest town of Barstow out in the middle of the desert. Very isolated. Nearby, you have several makeshift communities, such as Atropia. It's just a series of containers that have been stacked together to give the appearance of a city. This is where the United States Army trains for its deployments, and you can see that this was configured to match locations in the Middle East and the stability operations that the United States Army was engaged in for essentially most of the 21st century. And then here you have another one, Ujin. Now, way back in the day, this used to be where major maneuver battles occurred, at least training exercises, using a laser system. So essentially it was glorified laser tag out there in the desert, and they would spend anywhere from $20 to $30 million to deploy an entire brigade combat team. Also, the unfortunate service members that are stationed out there live a very difficult existence because they're constantly deploying to the field for a month at a time, and they only have one 4-day weekend, and they tend to work every other weekend of the month. A lot of service members say it's a much more difficult assignment than really being deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I can believe it. I'm also aware that the location seems to have a unique effect on certain people. You have strange events occurring in and around Fort Irwin, and that's not hearsay. There's more careers that seem to end in this post and more marriages that seem to end in this post. And let's be honest, military marriages are very challenging. And yet at Fort Irwin, the records and the numbers are far beyond what the averages are. Also strange is the presence of the Goldstone Deep Space Station antenna. And you can actually see it pretty well when you zoom in on it, but you have a series of satellite dishes that are supposedly communicating to all of our probes that are out in deep space. Now, when you look at this terrain, you can get an idea for how unique it is, and we're not even in Death Valley yet. When you see the terrain from the horizon, a lot of these ridge lines and many other aspects to them give the presence of something else. You can see why someone would have the theory that these could be mud fossils or titans of some sort from a distant past age, or perhaps this is some sort of completely melted civilization. Indeed, the Native Americans, the Navajo especially, have a legend about the Mojave that it was struck from the air by some large event. Now, modern scientists might call that a comet or something else, but you can see it in all the terrain. It just looks like it's been completely devastated. Yet, is this actual natural terrain, or are these remnants of tremendous buildings that once existed? It may sound rather extreme to suggest it, but this all could have existed within the Mojave. Now let's go and look at one of the legends of the Mojave, and that's the hidden city of Death Valley. So said a San Diego, California newspaper describing an event in Death Valley in 1947, and we'll take a look at Death Valley in a moment. Death Valley is a land of extremes, one of the hottest, driest, and lowest places on Earth. With summer temperatures averaging well over 100 degrees, it's often more than that, and a long history of human suffering in the vast desert, the valley appears to be aptly named. But people have been calling this rugged and desolate land home for as long as 9,000 years. Trace of giants found in the desert. In early August 1947, there's that year again, a man named Howard E. Hill of Los Angeles, California, spoke before the city's transportation club and told a sensational story. The tale described the work of a man named Dr. F. Bruce Russell, who claimed to have discovered a series of complex tunnels deep below Death Valley in 1931. Russell, a retired Cincinnati, Ohio physician, and a colleague named Dr. Daniel S. Bovee, who he had worked with on archaeological excavations in Mexico several years earlier, allegedly stumbled upon these caves quite by accident. Russell, who had reportedly moved west for his health, decided to check out mining opportunities. According to the tale, while Russell was sinking a shaft for a mining claim, he fell into a cave when the soil gave way and discovered a catacomb of tunnels leading off into different directions. Again the underground, and again catacombs. When Russell and Bovee began to explore the caverns, they followed one tunnel where they were extremely surprised to find the mummified remains of 3 gigantic men 8 to 9 feet tall. The giants were clothed in garments consisting of medium-length jacket and trousers extending slightly below the knees. The material's texture resembled gray-dyed sheepskin, but they believed it had been taken from an animal unknown today. The room also held several artifacts that resembled Egyptian and American Indian designs, and hieroglyphics were chiseled on carefully polished granite. The explorers believed they had found the burial place of the tribe's hierarchy. And here you have one of the pictures of a mummified giant, allegedly in California. Now, who knows about the veracity of that? Remember, this is a legend. Following another tunnel, they came across what they described as a ritual hall of these ancient people. Here, they once again found artifacts and marking in the well-preserved remains of animals, including dinosaurs, elephants, and tigers. Later, it was suggested that perhaps these bones belonged to ancient saber-toothed tigers and mammoths. Further, Russell had described to Hill that he and Bovee had only touched the surface of their discovery, stating that there were at least 32 tunnels and estimating that they ran across 180 square miles across Death Valley and parts of southern Nevada. Professional archaeologists were skeptical of the story, and Los Angeles County Museum scientists pointed out that dinosaurs and saber-toothed tigers appeared on Earth 10 to 13 million years apart. No one in the professional world of archaeology was interested enough in the story to check it out personally. What a surprise. Despite scientists' disinterest, Dr. Russell and a group of investors created a corporation called Amazing Explorations Incorporated to handle the release and hopefully profit from this remarkable find. But in the constantly shifting sands of the deceiving desert, Russell could not find the site the next time he tried to show his friends. Afterward, Russell disappeared. Months later, Russell's car was abandoned with a burst radiator in a remote area of Death Valley. His suitcase was still in the car. Of Dr. Bovee, he seemingly disappeared into the shadows, far away from this mystery. Nothing but a hoax, perhaps, but that is not the end of the story, nor is it the beginning. The kingdom of Shin-U-Av. For centuries, legends of an underground city and an ancient race in Death Valley have been told in the Puyut legend of the kingdom of Shin-U-Av. This place, meaning God's land or ghost land, is sacred to the Puyut. According to the legend, thousands of years ago, an important Puyut chief lost his wife. Devastated, the leader was so overcome with grief and sorrow he began to think that life without her was not worth living. He soon decided to take his earthly body into the land of the dead. Following the trail of brave Indian spirits through endless underground passages, the journey was long and difficult. As he traveled, he was besieged by evil spirits, fierce beasts, and supernatural demons. Finally, through his brave journey, was rewarded by glorious sunlight at the end of the trail, but he had yet one more ordeal, crossing an extremely narrow rock bridge that arched over a bottomless canyon. But he could see the beautiful green meadows of the Spirit Land across the way and determinedly made his way across safety. Entering the great kingdom ruled by Shin-U-Av, he was welcomed by a beautiful maiden who was the daughter of Shin-U-Av. The princess took the hand of the brave chieftain and led him to a large natural amphitheater. There the chief looked upon thousands of dead and happy Puyut dancing in the huge circle. Though he was no doubt pleased to see that the dead were happy, he bemoaned, "I will never find my wife in the crowd." The princess promised him that he would, and instructed him to sit at the edge of the circle watching until his wife would pass. She then left him momentarily, returning with food and drink to make him comfortable. When she returned, she left him with one more directive. "When you see your beloved wife, carry her off quickly without either of you making a backward glance, then travel back the way you came." The chief agreed and sat patiently, waiting to see his wife dance by. After several days, he saw several people he had known in the past, including friends and enemies, but he had not yet seen his beloved wife. Just as he was beginning to despair, he saw her approaching late on the third night. He ran to her with his arms spread wide, grabbed her, and the two then fled the valley hand in hand, moving towards the ribbon bridge that crossed the great chasm. But for all this bravery and determination, the chief risked a quick look back at the beautiful valley. In that moment, he was suddenly standing alone. In the end, he made his way back to his people, where he spent the rest of his life telling the story of the wonders and the beauty of the kingdom of Shin-U-Av, and thus the legend was born, passed down from one generation to the next for years to come. More catacomb tales. Many years later, in the 1920s, a prospector named White claimed he had fallen through the floor of an abandoned mine at Wingate Pass in the southwest corner of Death Valley into an underground tunnel. Going deeper into the labyrinth, he came to a group of rooms where he found hundreds of leather-clad human mummies, surrounded by gold bars and other treasures. The rooms in a tunnel that extended deeper into the catacombs were lit with a pale greenish-yellow light of unknown origin. However, White did not follow the tunnel deeper into the unknown. White claimed that he had explored the catacombs 2 more times after his initial find. During his second visit, he was accompanied by his wife, and on the third by a prospector partner, Fred Thomason. In the meantime, after hearing about White's find, a Puyut Indian named Tom Wilson, who worked as a trapper and guide, told a somewhat similar story. Wilson claimed that his grandfather discovered the below-ground caverns of Death Valley many years before. As he told the tale, his grandfather had gone into a cave that led to numerous tunnels and large rooms beneath the valley floor. After wandering for miles, his grandfather had come to an underground city where he found a group of fair-skinned people that spoke an unknown language and wore leather-like clothing. He also said that the people had horses, were sustained by the food he had never seen before, and pale greenish-yellow lights illuminated their city. The Indian, after having been missing for some time, finally returned home to tell his people of his discovery. Upon hearing his story, most of them were dubious about the authenticity of his adventure, but his grandson Tom Wilson ultimately believed the tale. Puyut Indians by Thomas Houseworth & Co. in the 1860s. Very interesting image, not what you'd expect to see. Prospector White agreed to lead Tom Wilson and a group of archaeologists to the underground city entrance, but on this trip White was unable to locate the cavern. However, they did locate a curious dead-end tunnel that had been carved out of solid rock. No doubt they were all disappointed. That didn't stop Tom Wilson, who spent the rest of his life searching for the underground city until his death in 1968. The area around Wingate Pass was eventually absorbed into the China Lake Naval Weapons Center and is now closed to the public. It's adjacent to the National Training Center that we talked about. Interestingly, another tale with remarkably similarity was told by an old prospector named Bork Lee in his book Death Valley Men, published in 1932. Lee also tells of an underground city located in the Panamint Mountains of Death Valley. In his story, 2 men named Jack and Bill were exploring near Wingate Pass when one of them fell through the bottom of an old mine shaft. His partner obviously followed into what was described as a natural underground cavern. The pair allegedly followed a tunnel some 20 miles northward into the heart of the Panamint Mountains. There's a picture of the Panamint Mountains. These 2 men eventually arrived at large, ancient underground rooms where they reportedly found several perfectly preserved human mummies adorned with thick armbands and held gold spears. Further, they said that the cavern rooms were illuminated by a system of lights fed by subterranean gases, and the rooms were filled with treasure. However, this time the report of the riches was more descriptive, with the men claiming to have found large statues of solid gold, stone vaults, drawers filled with gold bars and gemstones, and a beautifully polished round table. Further, the story describes perfectly balanced heavy stone wheelbarrows and huge stone doors which were almost perfectly balanced by counterweights. After finding the incredulous room, the two men carried off a few artifacts and some of the treasure before continuing their journey through the tunnel, which inclined upwards to the point that opened about halfway up the eastern slope of the Panamint Mountains. When the two men returned, they displayed the treasures they had brought down, which they hoped might lure archaeologists to the site. But in this tale, like so many others involving hidden riches, there would be a twist in the plan. Allegedly, a friend made off with the artifacts, and when the two men tried to lead experts to the mine opening, they could not locate it again. Jack and Bill claimed that a recent rainstorm had altered and rearranged the terrain, which does happen in this area. Like the former discoverers, these two were also determined to find the cavern entrance and were allegedly last seen preparing to climb the east face of the Panamint Mountains, after which they were never heard from again. So we have multiple different accounts of this incredible terrain and everything that we've seen within it and what it could allude to. Now, does this really show us that this is the old world and here are the Panamint Mountains, and you can see exactly where this is located in concern with the terrain that we just looked at? It's also interesting when you consider, and see here's Fort Irwin, and then China Naval Weapons Station is right along here off of this area in Ridgecrest. You can see that this is just a lot of empty terrain and mountains that goes all the way up with the border of California and Nevada. And interestingly enough, you end up at this very unique site called Pyramid Lake. So many anomalies all along this strange bit of terrain that runs between the two states until you get all the way up to Reno. There's also something else interesting here with Mono Lake. And it's stated that Mono Lake may be a location where there are subterranean chambers where naval craft can even access from the Pacific. There's also many rumors of underground transportation complexes in this area. Strange bases that no one has access to, vast tracts of government land, and very isolated and difficult to reach terrain. There are many mysteries about the Mojave, and these multiple accounts give us the indication that there are legends of pre-existing civilizations in this area. Now, what do they really allude to? Are these legends of the Fourth Era civilization, what we call the Tartarian civilization? Or are these even older legends that may have survived that were in use even during the Tartarian Era civilization, and all that remains somehow found their way to the Fifth Era? Well, there's still a lot to be explored, and we will be continuing our explorations of the Mojave. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed this unique exploration. Welcome, channel members, and I thought we would go back and take a look at some lost American organizations. Now, I'm well aware of the fact that we just had a great election here in the United States over the past week. Now, I've resisted referring to it publicly, and I have my reasons for doing that. One, because I respect all of you to make your own choices, and that's not just the choice about voting, if you decide to exercise that right, if you live in the United States or anywhere else, and maybe you live in a place where you don't vote, for whatever reason. What I wanted to talk about, though, was the entire concept and identity of lost American organizations. One of the most famous ones that tends to come up in the alternative research community is the American, or the Know-Nothing Party. We've discussed it before, and I explored it in the Strange History exploration much earlier in the year. Or was it last year? I think it was late last year. Things are starting to run together. Yikes. Anyways, one of the explorations revolves around the city of Louisville, this event called Bloody Monday. And what they inform us is this, and of course it's got its own little plaque, so don't even question it. Election Day, August 6th, 1855, known as Bloody Monday, due to riots led by know-nothing mobs. Yes, apparently this political party just instigated mobs to go attack people. This political party was anti-Catholic and nativist. And yes, that's a recurring theme we see in American politics. That theme has never really gone away, and depending on what you're supposed to think of this. Attacks on German immigrants east of downtown and Irish in the west caused at least 22 deaths. So let's just think about this. German immigrants and Irish. And yet now, Germans are basically considered as American, well, as American, if you will. Germans built the city of Cincinnati. Go watch that video, look at the comments, and look at how many people tell me random Germans built Cincinnati. Well, that may be true, but the Catholic Cathedral of the Assumption and St. Martin's Church were threatened with destruction. Fortunately, they weren't destroyed. The American Know Nothing Party. This party feared that Catholic immigrants from Germany and Ireland threatened the Protestantism and democracy. Because I guess they went together. Boy, that just rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it? By 1854, the party claimed 1 million members nationwide and led Jefferson County, this is in Kentucky where Louisville is, government. So no wonder there was no sort of reprisal or government effort to actually bring these ruffians to justice. They split over slavery, and by the end of the Civil War, they had vanished from politics in Louisville and Jefferson County, and the entire United States for that matter. So here we have this political party that apparently had such fanatical members that they were willing to attack people during voting. And then not 10 years later, they're gone? Well, there was slavery, there was the Civil War, there were other pressing matters. It's also interesting that this was erected as recent as 2006, only a short 18 years ago, by the Kentucky Historical Society. You wouldn't have found this plaque earlier. And in fact, in the 1900s, actually as recently as the 1990s, nobody really referred to this. In fact, even more interestingly is the fact that nobody even referred to the American Know Nothing Party. And yes, I'm using the word interestingly by choice. Is it a word? Are any of them words? I know, I'm having a little too much fun once again. Here's something else. Also see Know Nothing Party, Wikipedia excerpt. The Know Nothing movement also briefly emerged as a major political party. Very briefly, and then it was gone. So where are we really going with this? So we had this political party, the Know Nothing Party, the American Party. They were there and then they were gone. How exactly does that happen? I mean, if people were going to be members of a fanatical political party, or at least do fanatical things as part of a political party, why would they just let it go? Well, the times they are a-changing, I guess. Let's look at another very transient political party in United States history, the anti-Masonic movement. The anti-Masonic movement in the history of the United States popular movement based on public indignation at and suspicion. This is from Encyclopedia Britannica. I thought it was interesting to get their particular perspective on it. Public indignation and suspicion of the secret fraternal order known as the Masons or Freemasons. Why on earth would anybody have public indignation and suspicion of a secret fraternal order? Opponents of this society seized upon the uproar to create the Anti-Masonic Party. It was the first American third party, the first political party to hold a national nominating convention, which you know now with our two and really only practical political parties in the United States, there's always a big national nominating convention. Now it's basically like the pregame, if you will. I'm not suggesting that politics or sports or anything like that, or just simply for entertainment, merely stating that there's a lot of similarities and leaving it into that. And the first to offer the electorate a platform of party principles. So wait a minute, these basic things that our two major political parties in the United States engage in now all started with this anti-Masonic party? How is that? The movement was ignited in 1826, so questionable period, questionable time frame. We're actually going to be looking at that 20-year period here pretty soon, by the mysterious disappearance of William Morgan, a bricklayer in western New York who supposedly had broken his vow of secrecy as a Freemason by preparing a book revealing the organization's secrets. I guess he was not being secretive in his preparation of the book. Someone knew about it. When no trace of Morgan could be discovered, rumors of his murder at the hands of Masons swept through New York, and then in New England and the mid-Atlantic states. As anti-Masonic candidates proved successful in state and local elections, politicians saw the issue's vote-catching possibilities. Anti-Masonic newspapers flourished in the heated political atmosphere. In September 1831, the Anti-Masonic Party held a national convention in Baltimore, Maryland, nominated William Wirt for president, and announced a party platform condemning Masonry for its secrecy, exclusivity, and undemocratic character. Why on earth would anybody be angry or concerned about secrecy, exclusivity, and undemocratic character, especially in the United States? And I'm actually asking seriously. What do you think? So we talked about these two political parties, the Anti-Masonic Party and the Know Nothing Party. So what? What's the big deal about it? Why do we even care? Wirt won only the state of Vermont, 7 electoral votes. That's a lot of electoral votes for a state like Vermont. In the 1832 election, and the party went into decline after that. Why? We don't know. By the late 1830s, much of its reform impulse had been taken over by anti-slavery agitation, and most of its politicians had joined the newly formed Whig Party. And of course, why would anybody ever be suspicious of Freemasonry? I mean, certainly there's nothing about Freemasonry that seems remotely odd or unique or would draw our attention. I mean, they just like to wear unique costumes, go off and have secret meetings, and use a lot of symbolism. And they're also associated with a lot of very impressive structures. Now, what's this really come down to? What's the point of looking at these lost organizations? Is there some sort of connection with the Masons? Or is it all just an elaborate, what's the term I'm looking for here? So you're asking, Marillion, what's the big deal about this? So we had an anti-Masonic party in the 1830s, and we had this American party or this know-nothing party in the 1850s, and they're gone. So what? Well, let's actually look from our friends in the Smithsonian Magazine, and they have this little article about 8 secret societies you probably haven't heard of. Now, the theme of this exploration is Lost Organizations of America. We've just talked about 2 political parties, which on the surface seemed relatively legitimate, but they were only around for a decade or less, and they just vanished. What are these other secret societies, and why are we looking at secret societies again? Because I think it's interesting how our mainstream, and you can't get any more mainstream than the Smithsonian, tends to regard secret societies. And here they even admit it. By their very name, secret societies inspire curiosity, fascination, and distrust. Why? Why do we need to have secret societies? Don't ask. When, for example, news broke that Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, yes, I'm having fun pronunciations, that's okay, spent his final hours in February 2016 with members of a secret society for elite hunters. People naturally wanted to know more about the group. I mean, why? Why would we care if our public figures and our leaders are members of secret societies? I mean, we shouldn't care about it. We should just trust it. Is that what Smithsonian's telling us here? It's not uncommon, it's underlined, for public figures to be involved in selective societies, many of which have deep historical roots. Not only is it not uncommon, but it's quite frequent. In fact, many people have accused, or perhaps I should say, suggested, that I myself am a member of secret societies. I will share this with you. I have never been a member of any sort of fraternity or any sort of external society, except for that which my career path followed. Never. Now, you can say that perhaps I'm just lying. You can question it. You can say that, yes, my symbol is inspired by it. But I ask you, if you look far enough at the symbolism of these secret societies, you can find a symbol for pretty much anything and everything. If my symbol was just a circle, oh, it's a circle. It's a triangle, ooh, it's a triangle. It almost seems as though this is the ultimate red herring of red herrings. But is that what's really going on here? Anyway, we look at Scalia's fraternity, the International Order of St. Hubertus, was instituted by Austro-Hungarian Count Franz Anton Spork, not to be confused with Mr. Spock, in 1695 and named after St. Hubert, probably St. Hubert or some other way of pronouncing it, it always is, a hunter who once saw a golden cross between the horns of a stag. A hunter who once saw a golden cross between the horns of a stag. You can't make this stuff up. And he heeded the divine message and thereafter chose a life of piety. Now, where is all of our skeptics? Where are all of our people like Brian Dunning to say that this is just utterly ridiculous and absurd? And that why is there a society, an organization that's devoted to this? This doesn't pass the sense test. This doesn't pass the test of legitimate modern science and historians. And yet here we have it. All of our leaders, many of our influential people, if not all of them, are all part of some selective society. Spork's order aimed to honor St. Hubert's memory and promote responsible hunting and wildlife conservation because a guy saw a golden cross off the horns of a stag. So if I saw a golden cross over a Toyota Supra Mark IV, does that mean that I'm supposed to start a secret society that's going to honor Toyota Supras till the end of time? Never mind. After the organization denied membership to Nazis, Adolf Hitler dissolved it, but the order reemerged after World War II, and an American chapter was founded in the late 1960s. Yeah. Oh, goodness. The order is one of many clandestine, see, here we are using this terminology again, organizations that exist today, though the popularity of these secret clubs peaked in the 18th and the 19th centuries. And you're probably asking, why? Why were these secret societies so popular in the 18th and 19th centuries, especially in the United States? Back then, these societies served as safe spaces for open dialogue about everything from academia to religious discourse, removed from the restrictive eye of the church and state. Wait a minute, aren't these secret societies actually affiliated and related to the church and state? These societies were the incubators of democracy, modern science, and ecumenical religion. They elected their own leaders and drew up constitutions to govern their operations. It wasn't an accident that Voltaire, George Washington, and Ben Franklin were all active members. And just like today's networked radicals, much of their power was wrapped up in their ability to stay anonymous and keep their communications secret. So, wait a minute here. We have the mainstream and one of the essential elements of our government, and those charged with maintaining our actual national history, the Smithsonian, telling us that people thinking for themselves and going against the institution, the mainstream, was a good thing. This is why we were able to progress so far. So, why is it now that it's not acceptable for individuals to do the same thing? Oh, you have to be part of these certified societies. Why did these political parties just disappear? Why were they only around for 10 years? This was the 1800s, right? Why did the anti-Masonic Party disappear? Why did the American Party, the Know Nothing Party, just disappear? Are you seeing just a little bit of a contradiction? Are you seeing just a complete conflicting account? View of a room of Masonic Hall in Suffolk, England. Yes, once again, having found fun with pronunciations. Nice floor. Where have we seen that before? Anyways, the emphasis on secrecy inspired much distrust in the exclusive clubs. Gee, again, wonder why. No less than the New York Times weighed in on secret societies in 1880, not wholly dismissing the theory that Freemasonry brought about the Civil War and acquitted President Andrew Johnson, and has committed or concealed crimes without number. Hey, I remember that line from Doctor Who concerning the Master, the 5 Doctors. Great line there. Your crimes are without number and your villainy without end. Great line. The Times added this able theory of Freemasonry is not so readily believed as the theory that the European secret societies are the ruling power in Europe. But there are still many people as yet outside of the lunatic asylum who firmly believe it. I wonder how long they stayed outside. Many religious leaders felt, at the very least, conflicted about secret orders. Religious leaders, really? In April 1887, the Reverend Thomas DeWitt Talmage gave a sermon on the moral effect of Freemasonry, Odd Fellowship. Oh, yes, our IOF. We've talked about them before. The International Organization of Odd Fellows. Knights of Labor, well, that's a good one. Greek alphabet, and other societies. The Reverend, who said he had hundreds of personal friends who belonged to secret orders, cited Proverbs 25:9, discover not a secret to another, when asking his audience whether being a member of a secret society would be a positive or negative decision for them. In March 1892, James Cardinal Gibbons took a more definitive stand on secret orders, saying they had no possible excuse for existence. And that is a very good point. Why do we have to have secret societies? Why does everything have to be secret? But why is it openly stated to be a secret? Is it really a secret then? The national uproar against secret societies led one concerned group to create an annual anti-secret society convention. In 1869, at a convention in Chicago, of course, where else would it be, attendees went after the secular press. The organization's secretary said that journalists either approved or ignored secret societies. While few religious papers have spunk enough to come out for Christ in opposition to Masonry. Interesting. But by 1892, the convention, which deemed clandestine clubs an evil to society and a menace to our civil institutions, had failed to secure them anything but strong denunciation. And isn't that not still the case today? And is it really even strong denunciation? I don't know. Yes, here's one of these great symbols, and I suppose some people associate my particular logo on my channel with the sun, even though it looks nothing like it. You know, you can think whatever you want to. It doesn't bother me. The improved, benevolent, and protective order of Elks of the World. So we have all these secret societies that they label, and I'll attach this nice article from the Smithsonian for you to look at your own leisure. But let's take a look at some of these other organizations that they share with us. The Grand Orange Lodge of Ireland. Now, not an American organization, but don't you find it odd that it derives its name from William of Orange? Because, never mind. I'm just not going to go on with that one. I'll get myself in trouble. The Odd Fellows, yes, the aforementioned secret organization. And what about the Odd Fellows? The exact origins of the Odd Fellows, also known as Odd Fellows, have faded into history. Of course they have. But the website of a North Carolina branch of the Altruistic Society states that several chapters existed in England by the 18th century. Wait a minute. Why does an altruistic society need to be secret? If we're not secret, we can't be altruistic. How can we possibly help people unless we're being secret, right? The lodges were originally formed by the working men for social purposes, of course, and for giving the brethren aid and assisting them to obtain employment when out of work. So it kind of sounds like Tammany Hall and many other of the great government machines that we've had. I mean, political machines, whatever you want to call them. Isn't it funny how all of these organizations seem to work the same way, whether it's a political party or it's a secret society? The Knights of Pythias. Yes, we've come across these individuals before. Government employee Justice A. Rathbone founded the Knights of Pythias in Washington, D.C. in 1864. He felt that the United States, then embroiled in the Civil War, needed an organization that practiced brotherly love. Rathbone named his order after the Greek legend of Damon and Pythias, a tale of personal sacrifice for the purpose of friendship. The group was the first fraternal order to be chartered by an act of Congress after review by President Abraham Lincoln. And don't forget that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was an honorary member of the Knights of Pythias. Colors are blue, yellow, and red, as opposed to red, white, and blue, yellow instead of white. What does that mean? It signifies friendship, charity, and benevolence, respectively. The Ancient Order of Foresters, oh yes, this one. The Ancient Order of United Workmen. Nice picture there. And what are they all about? Mechanic John Jordan Upchurch, you have to have a name like that, founded the Ancient Order of United Workmen in Meadville, Pennsylvania in 1868, again right after the Civil War. So, during that time frame, everybody was just rife with doing anything and everything they can. Let's go start a secret organization, why not? With the goal of improving conditions for working class Americans. Wait a minute! All the skeptics who comment on the channel always tell me that they didn't have anybody seeking good conditions for working class Americans. That wasn't until the unions came about, and that didn't happen until the 1900s. Many of whom were moving from rural farms to urban areas and lacked a support system. Because I guess they had a support system out on rural farms? Oh, never mind. Members were white men between the ages of 21 and 50, who meant to listen to lectures, encourage research in the arts, and discuss news. Like the Foresters, the order set up insurance for its members. Insurance for its members? When one died, each brother contributed $1 to the family of the deceased. That group donation would eventually be capped at $2,000. The Ancient Order of United Workmen is no longer around. Another organization that's no longer with us, but its legacy survives as the group unintentionally created a new kind of insurance that led other fraternal organizations to add an insurance provision to their constitutions. Yes, insurance, another wonderful element of modernity in our fifth era civilization, because, you can really achieve insurance, can't you? The Patriotic Order Sons of America. Now, this is the one I've really been waiting for. The Patriotic Order Sons of America, passe, never mind, I'm just going to stop right there, dates back to 1847. That was back during the Mexican War, according to official history. Following in the footsteps of the Sons of Liberty and the Order of United Americans, the group became one of the most progressive, most popular, most influential. And have you ever heard of it before I shared it with you? As well as strongest patriotic organizations in the U.S., the Pennsylvania-based Allentown leader wrote in 1911. So again, many decades after the fact, but it's very well documented. We know all about it. It must have happened, right? Just because it was written about many decades after the fact. How progressive the order actually was is up for debate. Isn't it always when they claim something's progressive? In 1891, the organization refused to remove the word white from its constitution, defeating a proposition that would allow black men to apply for admission. According to the order's website, membership is now open to all native-born or naturalized American male citizens. But keep in mind, there's still a serious exclusivity here, as there are with all these organizations. 16 years and older who believe in their country and its institutions, who desire to perpetuate free government, and who wish to encourage a brotherly feeling among Americans, to that end that we may exalt our country in our work of fellowship and love. The Molly Maguires, that's an interesting one, and that movie with Sean Connery is quite intriguing. Also, Sean Connery went through a rather interesting His appearance really changed drastically, especially when you go from the last original James Bond movie he was in, You Only Live Twice, and then go to Diamonds Are Forever. I don't know exactly what was going on. It's quite intriguing. A lot of people say it had to do with the fact that he no longer wanted to wear his James Bond hat, his toupee. In fact, if you watch the film Wrong is Right, where he plays the reporter, at the end of the film, he famously pulls off his toupee and throws it away. It's quite interesting. A character who is a perpetual liar. So, all these secret organizations, all this time, contradicting one another, yet somehow they all played some sort of role in many of the things that endure in our current society. Why is this? Well, let's go back and look at the final fate of the anti-Masonic Party, the original one that we looked at, and the legacy. Anti-Masonry was deeply committed to conspiracy theories. And you know that whenever you see that terminology, it means several things. Conspiracy theories are merely the realm of the paranoid, and they're not to be taken seriously. In other words, you're not to think for yourself. There are other people who are qualified to think for you. Primarily the claim that Masonic elites were trying to secretly control the government. I mean, why secretly control anything? You can control something in the open, and what difference does it make? Well, actually, it makes all the difference in the world. As people became more mobile economically during the Industrial Revolution. Oh, you mean the Industrial Revolution that kind of happened during different times? There were different phases of it. Which phase of it? But anyway, never mind. And began to move west when new states were populated by white settlers and added to the Union, which happened very quickly and was very easily, apparently. The growth of the anti-Masonic movement was caused by the political and social unrest resulting from the weakening of long-standing family and community ties? Wait, what? How does that make any sense? With Freemasonry one of the few institutions that remained stable during this time of change, it became a natural target for protesters. Wait, what? How does that make any sense? As a result, the Morgan Affair became the highly visible catalyst that turned a popular movement into a political party. A very short-lived political party, or was it? Under the banner of anti-Masons, able leaders united anti-Jacksonians and others who were discontented with existing political conditions. You should not be discontented with existing political conditions, ever, especially in the United States. That's a fact. The fact that William Wirt, their choice for the presidency in 1832, not only was a former Mason, but also defended Freemasonry in a speech before the convention that nominated him, indicates that opposition to Masonry was not the anti-Masonic movement's sole issue. The anti-Masonic movement gave rise to or expanded the use of many innovations which became accepted practice among other parties, including nominating conventions and party newspapers. In addition, the anti-Masons aided in the rise of the Whig Party as the major alternative to the Democrats, with anti-Masonic positions on issues including internal improvements and tariffs being adopted by the Whigs. Ah yes, and then tariffs, according to the official history, would be the catalyst for the imposition of the wonderful federal income tax. And let's not forget the establishment of the Federal Reserve, two wondrous events in American history that occurred in the exact same year, 1913. There was a second anti-Masonic party. A later political organization called the Anti-Masonic Party was active from 1872 until 1888. This second group had a more religious basis for its anti-Masonry. The hell, you say? And was closely associated with Jonathan Blanchard of Wheaton College. Members of Congress. They didn't elect anyone to Senate, but elected several members of the House of Representatives. And we have the slew of individuals. So what's it all come down to? All these organizations, all these agencies, the mainstream and the Smithsonian themselves telling us that these organizations were good. They operated outside of the guidelines of the established institutions, the government, and religions. You can read the article yourself and come to your own conclusions. But what are they really saying? Is it something that really exists? Or is it merely a state of mind? Is it merely the ultimate red herring? To keep our attention fixed on certain things. Yes, of course, people are going to question things. And yes, of course, people are going to certainly be concerned when they hear things like secret societies, secret organizations. But is that by design? Wouldn't the best way to keep a secret be to never actually talk about something? Or better yet, never actually reveal the true intentions. Ever. In any sort of wording. Never rhetorically state anything. Keep your intentions secret. And have people operating with an entirely different set of intentions. I don't know. I'm just speculating and theorizing. But by all means, what do you think? And for Prime Explorers, we're actually going to go to the full end of this theory when we explore what we call layered kayfabe. But what are your thoughts, all channel members? What do you think of these organizations, these political parties, these secret organizations, all these things that were happening in the 1800s, when apparently there was all this social unrest occurring, wars, settlement, the frontier, and constant alteration in the American state of mind? Everybody still had time to join their special organization. And by the way, if you feel up to it, we could also start our own secret society. Thank you for joining me.
Computers and the programs will start thinking and the people will stop.
I'm no sorcerer, but I'll gladly test your steel.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the weekly live stream for the Res Tutor Orbis channel. I'm your host, Lucius Aurelian, and thank you for joining me as we discuss the return of the ancient enemy. I'd like to extend a greeting to all channel members, all viewers, and all others joining us. All are welcome here, and thank you for that NOK or the Laterix, and welcome as channel member. So we're getting right off to a big start. I wanted to go back and discuss the ancient enemy, and I'd been wanting to do it for several months. This was an early exploration that I had done on the channel. I mean, we're going back to the very early days. This was the summer of 2023. Now, there's a lot of different alternative researchers. They think that they've pinned down exactly who is the enemy or who is the ancient enemy. Of course, you notice I don't use the word evil. I think evil's a little cliche. Not to say that I don't believe in evil. I just think the term's a little cliche. So what are we going to be getting after? We're going to be discussing the presence of the ancient enemy in the past, but also the potential presence in the present, or now, as it were. And you may have seen this image before. This is actually an image that officially represents the crisis of the 3rd century in Rome, a time of civil war and chaos and external and internal threat. And what we're going to look at with discussing the ancient enemy is exactly who the ancient enemy is, or who they may be, where they're from, and how they've actually afflicted human civilizations through the course of what's actually happened in the past, or as the mainstream calls it, history. So, in any event, I know that everyone's expecting a lot of glitches and issues on this live stream, but I'm just going to take it with a grain of salt, and if we encounter any glitches, we'll just pull the Riker maneuver here, you know, not the one where he jumps over the chair, but just jumps out of the way from a phaser beam that doesn't even show up. This is a heavy topic, so I just thought we'd start with a little comedy. Anyway, there's a lot of artwork, and there's a lot of reflections that indicate that past civilizations have been through apocalypse. The way that this is explained by the mainstream is that this is merely artwork that represents what happened with, say, the fall of the Roman Empire. Although, if you actually read the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, they'll tell you that it happened very slowly over hundreds of years, and it wasn't one calamity or one massive event. And yet there's no shortage of artwork that depicts a calamitous event, or whatever you want to call it. Or maybe James Cameron's imagination run wild at the end of Abyss in the director's cut. But all that aside, we consider who and what the ancient enemy is. Is it an external threat, or is it an internal threat? And why do we use the analogy of Rome? Well, Rome comes up in the Western view of civilization, but it's not the only one. So we'll look at the others. It's just Rome is interesting because that's the one that gets pointed at the most. That's the one that we claim we know the most about, but oddly enough, we seem to know the least about. It's quite bizarre. And we'll make some references to that as well. But going back to the 5 eras, and yes, I decided to stick with the year 2023, and here's why I'm doing that, because that was the year that I know the channel started. You know, so if anybody makes on the comments that they've been watching for a couple years, I'll just give a thumbs up and say thank you, but I'm not sure how that'll be. You know, that'll come to fruition once we hit February. It will actually be a couple years, but 2023 is a benchmark year for us. I mean, who knows what year it actually is? But we know that in the past, with these reset events that we talked about in the last live stream exploration, there seems to have been some malevolent presence. Now, where and what is that malevolent presence? Is it something that was externally encountered by previous civilizations in the Foundation eras? Maybe. Some sort of Lovecraftian entity such as Cthulhu? Possibly, we'll consider that. Or is it something much more insidious than that, something much more internal? Perhaps you could even say it's a corruption of the baseline individual that happened throughout all these different eras. Or maybe it was something that was induced on the individual. And even more disturbingly, perhaps it was an external and an internal threat at the same time, especially if we consider what we posit that these civilizations may have ascended to. Imagine having a truly unified people and a truly unified civilization that you don't have all these different nation states. Now, of course, this is all hypothetical. I'm well aware of that. It's speculation, but there is a lot of different evidence that backs it up. It's just a question of whether you accept that evidence, like it always is. But how would a unified civilization like that be brought down? It would clearly take some extreme forces to do so, both internally and externally. So that's what we're going to consider to really explain what this malevolent presence was that brought us through the eras. Because yes, we posit that there may be these reset events that are cyclical or on some sort of long-term cycle. We have no idea how long they are. But what if there's another malevolent entity or intelligence out there that operates against us? Now, is it something that was with us in the past? Did we contact it in the distant past? Is it something that you even want to say is biblical or divine? And maybe even that kind of ancient enemy? Could well be. I'm not ruling anything out here. But we're going to look at the different possibilities, and I'm certainly going to open it up to the comments and for your opinions to see what we have on considering some of these. Now, this tends to be your classic image that you have when you're examining the past, how some massive malevolent force just tore everything apart. And interestingly enough, this is what sparks a lot of fear in people. Now, fear is one of the most fundamental elements of control, and we're going to be talking about control, and not just control, but also influence. If I have some massive army of great beasts that are tromping through great cities and causing death and destruction, well, it's going to get your attention. It should. It's just one of those things. But then there's also the possibility of this other form of entity. And so after the overview, we go to the potential origin of the ancient enemy. Where did the ancient enemy really come from? Has it always been with us? What are your thoughts so far? There you go, Sky Sage. Yes, H. Geiger, or Giger. I've heard it both ways. He had some wonderful artistic depictions, didn't he? Anyways, is this something that has always just been with us? Or is it some sort of cosmic entity, a different reality, if you will, that we inadvertently or maybe even intentionally contacted in our past exploits? Because one of our theories of the past is that the previous civilizations were always looking to explore new areas. They had that same curiosity, that same desire to explore new areas that we did. In and of itself, it's a benign interest, and yet any sort of benign interest can suddenly become quite malign with merely some unintended consequences. And perhaps that's the real reason that we inadvertently contacted these entities. Or it could even be that in exploring these areas, they contacted a dimension of pure chaos, if you will, and then allowed these malevolent entities or these chaos gods, or whatever you want to call them. There's many different ways to look at the ancient enemy to actually access our current reality. Or maybe one of the reasons that our reality is so fractured is because of the influence of these entities. Or maybe our previous civilizations had something to do with it. So many different theories, and, Worf can't do anything about it. I know it's a heavy topic. I'm trying to induce a little comedy. But the Lovecraftian cosmic horror tends to be one of the most direct representations that we have of the ancient enemy. And you'll find no shortage of it. And yes, H. Geiger, he did wonderful artwork. Now, I've actually used some of his artwork in some thumbnails in the past, but I try not to overuse it because, frankly, it's just that good. It's one of those things that it's kind of too awesome to use. At least that's my opinion. But are we really talking about horrifying, gigantic monsters? If you actually read the direct details from H.P. Lovecraft, he tends to tell us that a lot of these gods or these deities, or the old ones as he calls them, they don't even have awareness of humanity. They see humanity as something less than ants or insects. And that may well be the case. But what to really make of it? I'm not exactly sure. It's quite intriguing. But going past what the different depictions are, this is probably one of the most classic ones. And I remember all the horrors that you see, and whether you're talking about reading the original works of Tolkien or you'll find it in many other works of fantasy, you have these gigantic, terrifying creatures that are tearing apart civilizations. And I think this particular image really captures that quite well. Is it possible that this is what transpired in the past? Now, was it the Tolkien theory that there was original creation and then what he refers to as evil corrupted it? It could be. Or could it simply be because of the fact that the ability to be corrupted was there in the first place? You might recall when we looked at Tolkien's New Threat, the book that he never actually wrote, it seems as though he understood that there was an internal corruption with humanity. And indeed, that's an underlying theme in a lot of his books. And it's actually an underlying theme in a lot of stories. Not so much in recent stories, of course, because, I guess human beings in the 21st century are incorruptible. At least you might think that. But I also want to address the recurring theme of serpents in this. Now, serpents, for whatever reason, they tend to get a bit of a bad reputation. And perhaps it's just because of the fact that they're used in symbolism a lot. Now, some will say a serpent represents a malevolent entity. We're actually going to consider a serpent civilization in the subsequent exploration here later this month. But there's also the fact that the serpent can represent knowledge. It can represent forbidden knowledge. It can represent other elements of a different civilization that we don't know. So I want you to keep that in mind. I'm not here to proverbially throw serpents under the bus and say anytime you see a serpent, it's evil. Any symbol or any representation could represent something good or something bad, depending especially on the civilization at the time. It's ultimately up to you to determine it. And remember, context is everything. Of course, once again, that tends to be something that we like to lose these days, is the lack of context. Because there is a different view of the serpent, that perhaps it is noble, it is wise, and it has the knowledge that we would need to build an effective civilization. There's many different ways to look at these things. Yeah, speak with forked tongue, absolutely, Sky Sage, and that's oddly enough a saying that endures to this very day. What does it really mean? Does it have a practical meaning, or is it just something that we have? Not really sure, but anyways, Vaughn, if not true, why so prolific in symbolism around the world in so many cultures? That's a good point. And you do see it everywhere. But perhaps it's just because of that's what is repeated. So it's hard to say. But yes, I have shown a couple different examples. And again, it goes both ways. Sometimes the serpent depicts something that's good and wise, and other times it depicts a terrifying, malevolent threat. Sometimes it depicts an apocalyptic threat to the entire land. So is it to be taken literally or is it to be taken figuratively? It could be somewhere in between. But we do see a lot of serpent symbolism, especially when it comes to accounts in certain religious texts. It's always the harbinger of something to watch out. Now, whether, again, that's an external threat or an internal threat, I leave that to you to determine. But some of the original imagery will give you the terrifying nature of the serpent. Now, is it to actually be perceived as a serpent? Is it some other sort of creature, a dragon? Is it some much more terrifying creature? Those are all possibilities as well. Was this the only way that they had to really display or remember this terrifying creature that came after them in the past? Or maybe it's just the fact that our memory, our true history, has actually been lost. And we're trying to reconstruct it from our feelings, from what images we have in our mind, the best that we can. That's something to recall when we're considering the ancient enemy. There's also the possibility in the presence of the technological corruption that we have, or technological singularity, technological amalgamation. And you may recall that when we did the immortality exploration, for the few who watched it, there was this fear or concern that having a biomechanical integration would not actually lead to immortality or life forever. It would actually lead to a fate that's far worse. And indeed, in a lot of these corpulent and disgusting depictions, that's the fate that you'll actually see. We'll consider that as well. We'll also consider the fact that perhaps the ancient enemy is something that is some sort of what we would consider actual artificial intelligence, or maybe even something more insidious, a hive mind. We'll talk about that as well when we consider the actual origin of it. I have no mouth and I must scream. Ah, yes. Harlan Ellison, Polly, and you are exactly right. That's what that's from. Good call out there. And I'm glad to see you here with us, Polly. So going past this and going past some of these original depictions, we consider the account of the old ones, or the old one, the Cthulhu mythos, and all the other horrifying deities that H.P. Lovecraft dreamed up or actually had some sort of knowledge. Is it possible that these deities, or the old ones, as he called them, really do exist? That somehow, in some way, he had awareness of them in the distant past, and they were now projected in the present. And the lingering presence of these entities stay with us. Because when we think of the power of beings beyond our very imagination, it's really hard to put it in a visual form. And indeed, what's the ancient enemy that we fear the most? Is it the great colossal beast that's horrific in nature? Or is it the threat that we can't see? Or beyond that, is it something that's within us that we don't really see? That's the terrifying implications of it. So, it doesn't matter if it was real. What matters is if a group collectively believed and acted upon it. A lot of truth spoken there, Atticus, and you're right. A lot of times, groups do collectively believe and act on things because those in authority or those who think that they know exactly what's going on, they oftentimes will do that. And that's what they will convince others to act on. And we'll get back to that in a little bit. Robert, definitely within. And perhaps that's the most terrifying creature of all, is that which lies within us. Because it seems that many things act to distract us, or to at least keep us going after one another within. Perhaps that's even more disturbing. Now, what I want to move on as we go from origin is to consider the levels of power, or the means of control. And we have levels of power: money, time, and cruciform. Now, I made this back for the original Ancient Enemy exploration. We're all well aware of the means of control. And the first level that anybody and everybody can see is money. They always say just follow the money and you'll be able to figure out who's behind everything. Yes and no. Yes, in the fact that money as it is and what's observable, you can follow it, and you can follow the funding streams to their logical conclusions. However, I'm going to ask you this question. It's pretty much bandied about in our faces, like many other things, what the reality of money is. In fact, you have actor Jeremy Irons in Margin Call saying, money, it's not real. It's just printed pictures on paper to keep us from killing each other for what's for breakfast. So it's very clear that it's just a simple means of control, along with time and patronage. And that's level 1 control that everybody can see. But is the entire land, are all the societies, and is our civilization based on level 1 control? Were previous civilizations based on level 1 control? That's the big question. It's when we consider higher levels of control that things become very disturbing. Because yes, if someone's just being influenced, dominated by money, if you watch that recent Netflix series Squid Game, you'll see, yes, money has a big effect on everyone. And it can cause people to do rather crazy, ill-advised things, or it can cause people to do long-term things. And patronage and time can also be substituted for money. Or the three operate in a little bit of a triumvirate there. Yes, there's that number again, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. I'm not doing it intentionally. I'm really not. But if you look at level 2, physical, invisible, consider that there may be some sort of physical creature that can actually control, dominate, and influence beings. We'll consider that, especially with the concept of the cruciform. But going beyond that, what about level 3? If there's a spiritual or perhaps an invisible ethereal control on humans. Now, I know I'm going way out there into what you might call left or right field, but is it possible that there is the ability to affect us in ways that we're not even aware of? Now, of course, people say, well, that's just utter paranoia. But at the same time, it's one of the baselines of religious beliefs and doctrines, that there are deities that try to control and influence us. So it's all there, but what's the reality behind it? And what are your thoughts on this? And I'm certainly opening up to the comments now because I'm keen to see what we have. Oh, thank you for that, Creator's Life. I appreciate that very much. Let me make sure I recognize the other one. The Laterix or Laterix. Let me make sure I got that right. Thanks for the super sticker. Lawrence White. It's the spiritual bankruptcy of our society which makes people susceptible to control. Very true. And a lot of times we don't understand or accept that or realize it. We have 20 years till the end? Oh, so it's not going to end in 2025? I guess it just depends who you ask, right? Gotta have money. Well, yeah, that's the thought that a lot of us have. But do you, or are there other means used to influence people? Hmm. Hmm. Yes, the saying goes, we are God's temple, the individual themselves and their spiritual identity. So very true. Hmm. What's our real story? Tones outside of our audible range can control moods and emotions. Ah, yes, very true. And maybe that's how the spiritual realm of that actually exists. It's something that we can't even perceive, but just imagine that. It can actually influence our actions, it can influence our moods. Or you could just say, it's because of that time of the year. In some places in the land, it's winter and people are feeling shut in and depressed. Other people have just blown a lot of money because of the holidays and they feel stressed for other reasons. And on it goes. Sean P. here. Possession by frequency we can't even see. Another possibility. So keep in mind, we're just going off with the different means that this could be used to influence or control us. But here's something that tends to apply, and maybe it always applied, and it was the ultimate downfall of the previous civilizations. Think what we tell you. We're all in this together. Do not question authority. Do as you're told and be left alone. Now, I'm going to ask you an overarching question, and it doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter what nation you're in. How many people do you think abide by these precepts every single day? How many people just simply think what they're told? How many believe they're all in it together, wherever they are? How many do not question authority? And how many do as they're told and believe they'll be left alone? Do people really think that? Do you really think that if you just do as you're told, you'll be left alone? I mean, do people really think that? I'm asking openly here. Maxwell, all of them. Yes. Oh, Robert. Yeah, 99%. There's some people that'll avoid that number like the plague, but I'm not afraid of numbers because numbers don't matter to me, Robert. Yeah, you're probably right. It's probably something in that realm. 95%. It's a lot of people. Hey, Clara, good to see you. Kathy, I will not obey. I don't. Truth of the matter is, we all do and we all don't in different times of our lives. But as we gain awareness, that's the key thing. Remember, you don't actually have to openly rebel on anything. You just simply have to not go along with it. It might be that simple. I'm not saying I have all the answers, but imagine just getting away from this baseline paradigm right here. Yes, there you go, Nate. Ignorance set up from birth. And a lot of that is ignorance. A lot of that is just simple, I don't want any trouble. It's just easier. It's the path of least resistance. So keep in mind that this isn't anything malevolent. This may not even be anything intentional. So there is no conspiracy. It's just sort of how things developed. You don't have to look at it that way. You could just say that's how we're operating. Yes, there you go, Scotty. Like paying taxes. It's how it's always been. Just accept it and go along with it. And if you have a problem with it, well, we vote all the time. Space Fraggle. Yeah, you need the shades from They Live. They Live very definitively referred to the year 2025. I'm not sure if there's any significance or it was just a spitball year, but who knows. Anyways, so moving on, we consider the idea of the cruciform. Now, if you're not familiar, Hyperion or the Hyperion Cantos was a series of novels written by science fiction author Dan Simmons in the 1980s and 1990s. Science fiction is interesting because it tends to be able to express concepts of the old world a little bit openly, and probably for the reasons that Gene Roddenberry said, because it's so make-believe, nobody takes it seriously. Well, they started taking it seriously, especially in the 1990s. We'll get to that in a moment. But what the cruciform was it was a parasitic life form. It was in the shape of a cross, although it didn't necessarily reflect anything religious, although, yes, there was the analogy there, but I'm not using that analogy, just the example of the parasite that attached itself to the being. Once the parasite attached itself to the being, it would reproduce the being. What we find out in the story, spoiler alert, and if you're into science fiction, I can definitely recommend the Hyperion Cantos, all four of the books. The cruciform was created by a futuristic artificial intelligence to preserve human beings, because once you had this cruciform attached to you, there was no way to remove it. There were 4 ways, but we can get to that some other time. And what it did was it completely removed the individual identity from the human being, yet preserved their physical presence indefinitely. Does this sound familiar? If you live forever physically, you lose your individual identity. And that was the true terror of the cruciform. And indeed, it's considered one of the most horrific parasitic entities in science fiction, fantasy, or the ideas of such, because of what it really represents. You have this parasitic entity that has total control over you, and suddenly you do not have the ability to die. And yet, oddly enough, in the story, the church in the story, of course, I'm not referring to any church in the present, they actually use this cruciform to gain total control over the entire civilization. Is it possible there was some sort of technology, whether it was a biological technology or an artificial technology, it doesn't matter, that gave people extended life or even indefinite life? And yet achieving that technology ultimately led to the fall of the civilization. Thoughts on that possibility? Only weak-minded individuals are susceptible. Possibly, but many people are, how shall we say, tricked, deceived in many ways. Theatricality and deception. Hey, Julia. Borg-like. We'll get to the Borg in a second one. Yeah, biological entity rather than a technological one. The hive mind concept. Yes, very true. Creator's life. I don't think you could download technology that would get my intelligence in something. Yeah, that's true. Perhaps not. Yes, Polly. It does come up with that story, though, doesn't it? With previous civilizations being corrupted. And the ultimate loss, what's free will? And that's another question in and of itself. It's all just in your point of view, says Robert. Yeah, true enough. True enough. And so moving on from the idea of the cruciform, in time, eventually the cruciform and the degradation or the corruption of previous beings led to the creation of an entirely new being. Now, whatever you want to call this, they've got the created being in the Hyperion cantos called the Shrike, which is an avenging angel, an AI intelligence, the only thing that can remove the cruciform. It creates an entirely different sort of being, something that's no longer human in any way, shape, or form. And perhaps this is what the ancient enemy was. This mere influence, this internal desire that we fear physical death so much that we're willing to forfeit everything, even our own individuality. And then, of course, you get the other accounts of corrupted human beings. And believe me, we have plenty of accounts of corrupted human beings becoming something entirely different, no longer even being identifiable as human. And no, of course, we're not talking about the horrifying effects of radiation and the post-atomic horrors that we always had thrown in our faces from 1950 to 1989 or thereabouts. But you actually have corrupted beings for many different reasons, physical and spiritual corruption. It's considered one of the greatest fears, and for some reason, it still lingers in our mind to this day, even though the greatest thing that we tend to fear is physical death. That's the thing that's flashed in our faces every day. People die, that's very bad. You don't want to die. Do anything to avoid dying. I'm simplifying, but let's be honest. What is blasted in our faces every day? But yet we still have this subconscious fear of having this subversion imposed upon us. Stabulator. Genetic manipulation. At the baseline level, you're absolutely right. True genetic manipulation. And could it have been something even more than that? Something that involved the process of alchemy? Absolutely. And we're going to be exploring the occult sciences in more detail this coming week. So look for that exploration. Vaughn, or the plague doctor, said to infest the crops in the village would die from plague. So true. And always a good exploration to do. Adam says it. All we have to fear is... I'm waiting. Hey, RB, good to see you. Since birth, we are fed fear. Very true. Fear is the thing that we are fed the most. I certainly agree with that. Hey, Jory, yeah, don't worry. You'll get to see that in the upcoming exploration, too. There's about a 20-minute section just on that, so tune in if you're interested. Anyways, so back to the levels of power in the cruciform, because that's where we are right now. Oh, Julie, yeah, the golems. That's another good example. And something that they showed in Robin of Sherwood, Time of the Wolf. Great series and great episode. Although some people are bored by it, and I understand why. I mean, it's a completely different series set in a different time, the mid 80s, but everybody has their opinion. Anyways, so moving on past how beings can be corrupted, there's also the concept of the MIGO, another Lovecraftian terror. The MIGO are stated to be extraterrestrial entities, although remember that Lovecraft was more about different realities and portals. He wasn't so about cosmic space. I mean, some people say he was, but I always interpret it differently. And the MIGO were these creatures that wanted to study and dominate human beings. They were known for taking human brains and inflicting terrifying experiments on humans. And you can actually find, I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was an early 90s compilation of short films, and I just can't remember the name. I think it was H.P. Love. Oh, the Necronomicon. That was it. H.P. Lovecraft's Necronomicon. And it has the guy who played Weyoun from Star Trek Deep Space Nine as H.P. Lovecraft in a series of connected tales. And you actually see the MIGO depicted in the last tale. It's pretty terrifying. It's well done. Early 90s, so you have a lot of practical effects in it, prior to things changing. But the MIGO may have represented some sort of servant of this ancient enemy, the servant that did the dirty work. Obviously I can't show any more direct images in this because we know what'll happen to this live stream, but just enjoy this little comic of it, or just be prepared for it. Now, what were the MIGO actually working on? There were theories and themes that they were working on constructing one of these cosmic entities, or the possibility of building a great creature from the experiments that they did on humans. Again, another terrifying possibility in the past. And then, of course, we go back to some of the accounts that we have from the mythologies of our previous civilization. Was it snakes? Was it Set? Was it something else? Was it all just a coincidence? That's where things tend to get very, very confused, obfuscated, as I like to say. And is that by intention? Or is there another reason for that? Well, I'm not sure. Perhaps it's all true. Every element of it may be true. The past doesn't exist and the future isn't coming. There is only now. Well, that is true. Live in the moment. I mean, that's what Yoda said, right? And you're right. But there are some of us who live in the past and the future and the present all at the same time. It's an interesting consideration. How does time affect us, or does it not affect us at all? Chassis, maybe they don't exist. It's just a part of our imagination. And that could be very true too, Chassis. You're absolutely right. It could just all be in our mind. We manifest these things because of the fears that RB said earlier are fed to us from the very start. That's all very true. Very, very true. Now, I want you to consider the concept of the hive mind. This is the book Out of Control, written by Kevin Kelly. This was again written in the early 90s. Now, a little interesting point about the early 90s. There was the real fear of the concept of the hive mind. Out of Control was looking at the rise of quote-unquote neo-biological civilization based on all the implementations of technology. Keep in mind, this is the early 90s. This is before the advent of the mainstream available internet to everybody. I mean, the internet was around, but it was limited availability at that time, and you still had that nice dial-up modem. Oh, wasn't that lovely? But Kevin Kelly's book really looked at how a hive mind could affect different people, and it actually influenced a lot of different science fiction stories and was replicated in science fiction stories. Indeed, Dan Simmons says that Out of Control influenced the outcome of the Hyperion Canto. So quite fascinating. And this book had a lot of contributions and a lot of reflections, and it became more famous as time went on. And this is Kevin Kelly. Now, who knows what his actual story is? Yes, we can read his biography, but I suspect there may be more, maybe less to it. Anyway, on the concept of the hive mind, you might remember that in Star Trek The Next Generation, they had introduced a new villain, the Ferengi. And the Ferengi were, well, they were to be pitied. I mean, yes, these three yahoos overpowered two officers, a Klingon and an android, but they weren't the best villains because they weren't really that threatening. And so the series started off rough. But then they showed us the Borg. And remember the Borg, and I'm talking about classic Star Trek The Next Generation here, 1987 to 1994, and the Borg being introduced in the second season. They were originally supposed to be an insectoid race, believe it or not, or insectoid species, excuse me. But they were actually transformed to cybernetic individuals. The hive mind concept of the Borg was very terrifying because it was very alien. And there's a lot of theories that suggest that whatever the ancient enemy really is, it seems to indicate the presence of a hive mind. And what's really a hive mind? Well, it's just like what they showed the Borg being in classic Star Trek The Next Generation. They all speak with one voice, and yet you hear all the voices at the same time. The minds are all plugged together in a sort of gestalt consciousness. It's terrifying because you talk about the complete loss of individuality. And this is what endures from this time frame. Space Fraggles. Xenomorph Queens used a hive mentalities. Absolutely. But what's frightening about the hive is you don't have a single leader. It's everything all plugged together. It's all, as Pauly says, assimilated. Or as Adam says in The Matrix, it's a complete collective, a collective intelligence. PJCC West, we're all Jedi fooled into believing otherwise. We must all work on ourselves to be better, to actually have a comprehension of what might mean is the first step to being reunited with the all. Probably the most true words ever said. But going back to the concept of the hive mind, eventually they walked it back. By Star Trek First Contact, the first main film to feature the Borg, they brought about the concept of the Borg Queen. And, this is attributed to studio executives that said that they needed a villain with a face, etc., etc., etc. And to be honest, a lot of this was mitigated because Jonathan Frakes made the great casting choice of Alice Krige, who brought a wonderful character to the Star Trek Next Generation universe. And everybody liked the Borg Queen at the time. And everybody liked the movie Star Trek First Contact. However, there was an interesting point, though. They had completely removed the hive mind mentality of the Borg. Oh, there's just a queen running it. Okay, well, that makes sense. We identify with monarchy, and we understand that. It's no longer an alien concept. And oddly enough, outside of The Matrix, you saw every single franchise and property that talked about a hive mind retract it. And that's really what had happened in Star Trek. It's the most popular, well-known example. And what really softened that was Alice Kriege's great performance in making a memorable character. But it had undercut the threat of this hive mind. And indeed, villain decay was something Star Trek was known for in the 90s. And you could argue it didn't stop to this day. But I'm not talking about contemporary Star Trek. I'm talking about the 1990s. And a lot of people suggest that the villain decay started with that. Because after that, the Borg were defanged, and that was that. They showed up on Star Trek Voyager, and they were very easily handled. And, they've really been easily handled since then. And, of course, the writing trope that they say is, well, it's too awesome of a villain to use. No, it's not too awesome if you've got good writers, or if you've got studio executives that are willing to take chances. Or, if there's some other reason. Perhaps they're saying something they're not supposed to say. But I'm not going to dive into conspiracy theories. There are a lot of depictions that we have, though, that show a hive mind from the distant past, and a hive mind being imposed on a society of individuals. Now, just think of how terrifying of an idea that is. Now, yes, you can think about it with the Borg, but think about it if it's more of a biological component as well. Or then you add the spiritual component, the total control. Then it becomes very, very terrifying and very frightening. Lane, hive mind, mark of the beast, microchip in the brain, all seem pretty similar. Ah, yes, Lane. And wonderful reference there to the Thief in the Night series from the 1970s. Ah, yes. Something that definitely made the posit or the speculation that we are not in any sort of millennial reign. Beware, the end times are upon us. The times of tribulation. Yeah, I always like throwing that one in the comments. I don't know for sure. And I don't mean to denigrate or insult either one of the theories or the ideas behind it. It's just interesting to think about holistically in that way. You will never get me. Yeah, maintain your individuality at all costs. What Sky Sage got here? If we lived longer, we might figure this out. Well, maybe we do, Sky Sage. I mean, I don't know when it's all going to end. Maybe you do. You can let me know. But I'll just keep going as long as I can. I promise you. You got my word on that. Anyways, moving on from the levels of power to, are these an external or internal threat? Because is the ancient enemy an external or internal threat? In other words, is it a bunch of creatures that destroyed previous civilizations, or is it something that managed to influence human beings from the inside? Or did it do both? Hey, Wendy, good to see you. And what might that have looked like? Well, that's where we go back to the Lovecraftian cosmic entities, the old ones, and all their terror and all their glory. And what did they really reflect? What were they actually all about, and what were they showing? these horrific monsters in their existence. At least that's what we think of them as. And if you see some of the other John Carpenter films, most notably In the Mouth of Madness, that has a strong Lovecraftian theme. And indeed, that's probably one of the most terrifying stories behind it. Part of John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy, along with Prince of Darkness and The Thing. And certainly I can recommend all those films. But oddly enough, there is a lot of unique artwork showing what these old ones may have looked like. Now, is it possible that this was really the external portion of the threat, if you will? And they had such power, they had such ability that they were able to also turn it into an internal threat. Well, that's really where you're looking at how terrifying things could actually be. Our own complacency. Very true, Lawrence. And that seems to be what's used against us all the time. Kraken, one of the main energy companies, along with Octopus. How true, Carrie. How true. And it comes up all the time, doesn't it? Octopus oil. Kathy, they feed off our loosh or our energy. Definitely seem to feed off of something. And it seems to be a recurring theme too, doesn't it? The zombie fungus that takes over an ant. That's another good example. But if you look at these Lovecraftian entities, and yes, they tended to have the octopus mentality or the Kraken mentality to them. There was a lot of terror that they seemed to convey. But again, is it an external or an internal threat? And maybe that's what happened in the past. Now, this is probably one of the most terrifying depictions I could find. And yet, as horrific or as corny as you may think this is, again, it depends on your perspective. Remember that which we fear the most is not what we can see. It's what we cannot see that scares us. That's the internal fear that's always used against us. The fear of death, the fear of the unknown, the fear of that which we cannot see. So while this may seem like a terrifying apparition, remember that every single human being seems to be more afraid of that which they cannot see. I think that's one of the most important themes when it comes to dealing with the ancient enemy. The ancient enemy understands fear, and the ancient enemy understands that the best way to impose fear upon us is to play upon our fear of the unknown. Now, of course, it's something that's brought up. And oddly enough, referring to Star Trek, if you look at classic Star Trek, exploring the unknown was not to be feared. Now, in more recent Star Trek, it just seems like, we recycle the same ideas and now it's just derivative. There is no unknown. I mean, why should there be? It's a parody of everything that's come before. So there's nothing to be afraid of. Certainly nothing unknown, right? Because why would you want to learn to deal with it? The translator added the Rhine. Oh, how about that? Spirit Anon. I've been thinking lately that the Anunnaki enslaved humanity in Lemuria, Atlantis, and Tartaria were attempts to push back and failed. Possible. Or at least the names that we would refer to it as. Polly, it reminds me, ufologists often place mantis beings at the top of the hierarchy. That is rather interesting and quite a coincidence, isn't it, Polly? You're right. I do recall that. There you go. Jamie just summarizes it very nicely. Yeah, I don't pay attention to it, Jamie. I mean, I don't know what the quality of it is. The truth of the matter is it lost me in the early 2000s with Star Trek Enterprise. This little episode called A Night in Sick Bay. Look, I love dogs, but I'm not watching Star Trek to watch an episode about the captain's frickin' dog, all right? So enough about that. But, everyone's entitled to their opinion. But moving on beyond that, going on past what we have with this external or internal threat, what could it really represent? And we have this fear of this invasion, this attack from some overwhelming force. Oddly enough, this has been with us for our entire conscious memories. Now, a lot of people will tell you, well, it simply came from the era of the Cold War, and it was part of an atomic attack. Atomic as they called nuclear weapons back in the 1950s. We were to be afraid of it, and this was a fear that was projected in our minds. Yet, oddly enough, you can find earlier stories. I'll name one of the most famous ones from author H.G. Wells, who wrote about War of the Worlds. And that was just a little bit before World War I, World War II. Well, you could just say H.G. Wells was a visionary. He knew what was coming in the future. Sure he did. And if you ever watch Things to Come, you'll see exactly what he knew about the future. Disturbingly so. But we have this conscious fear of attacks from overwhelming forces, and it never really goes away. And if you superimpose that over what we have of the past with this collapse of civilizations, that always seems to be, well, it happened over hundreds of years in Rome, but the imagery we have and the artwork seems to indicate that it happened overnight. Well, that was just that time that Rome burned and Nero was fiddling. Yeah, sure, whatever. But this looks like an apocalypse to me. Make of it what you will. I mean, what are your thoughts? What happened in Rome in the past? KC, just like the book written about the Titanic before it happened. Oh, yeah, there's multiple cases of that. Although the trouble is, if we didn't live through it, we don't really know, do we? That's the odd thing about it. Because believe it or not, history is a little bit more fluid than we like to think. Robert, this is encoded in our DNA. Very true. Or perhaps it's affecting us on another level. Perhaps there's some sort of frequency. What about a parasite? Yes, Michael, that's what we talked about at the beginning with the cruciform, and I considered the idea of a parasite. And also consider the idea beyond a physical parasite, a spiritual parasite, because people think those exist as well, and there's evidence that they may do indeed exist. Paulie, the secret societies of Rome can be telling, very similar to those today. Yes. And that's another peculiar detail about the 1800s, Paulie, is there seem to be all kinds of secret societies. Now, I'm sure everyone's asking, well, why aren't you covering the secret societies of today? And I'm just going to respond very simply. How is it a secret society when everybody knows about it? How is it a hidden gesture when everybody knows about it? That's not a secret. It's something that we're very clearly supposed to see. In fact, if I want to get everybody to talk about something and think about something, I tell them it's secret. Everybody tells them it's secret. Do you want to know what the real secret is? That which people don't talk about. That's what we should be concerned about. Of course, if you're concerned about that, what people don't talk about, well, then you're paranoid and you're a conspiracy theorist. And, people like Brian Dunning are going to laugh at you, and heaven forfend. We don't want Brian Dunning laughing at us. But it all comes back to that. Do you have the courage? Do you have the desire to think for yourself? Because no, it's not easy. Everyone will try to stop you. And not necessarily intentionally. A lot of people are just, quote unquote, doing their jobs and not thinking twice of it. So, well, there you go, Mr. Wynn. Every 9-year-old knows the Illuminati. Absolutely. There's a video game about it, Deus Ex. And if you grew up in the 1970s, you could read the Illuminati trilogy. Oh boy, there's a conspiracy right there. It's completely destroyed my mind. I can't do anymore. Anyways, but you're right. Everyone's known about it and everybody talks about it. So it just seems to be a little obvious. Now, I'm not discounting it. I'm not to say it's not part of the hierarchy or it's not in some way connected to the ancient enemy, but I suspect there's something a lot more insidious and a lot more grandiose than we like to think. Something a little bit more elaborate than just people dressing up in fancy costumes, making fancy hand gestures at one another, and going out to really nice dinners. Look, I like dining out too, but it gets a little old after a while. Here we go, Lawrence. People get lazy, selfish, exhausted, and they can't keep up. The civilization, foreign enemies chomping at the bit to conquer the remains of the falling civilization. Very true. Or if you had an external threat, and then they managed to actually exploit the internal weaknesses. The new threat, according to J.R. Tolkien. The low level, ever so true. Michael, I always think for myself. I do it for others. Yeah. And, it's also hard. It's very, very hard because there is a compulsion to want to help people. Oh, there you go, Sky Sage. I had a feeling you'd have a good word twister there. The Illuminati. Good one. Good one from Sky Sage. Maxwell Smart. Yes, the real secret societies. The one nobody talks about. The one no one's aware of. Those are the real secret societies. Maybe they're not even out there. Oh, but Sky Sage. Yeah, Sky Sage might be onto something there. But, make of it what you will. But you look at some of these other images and, you see this desiccated destruction, and you can make the connection that this was played on our fears when we look at what I like to call the nuclear nightmare fear films of the 1980s. There was a little triumvirate of films. 3 again. Just throw it in everyone's faces. You can't ignore it. And that was the films The Day After from the United States, Threads from the United Kingdom, and Testament, which was more of the low-key American Playhouse version with Jane Alexander. It was also an early appearance for this guy named Kevin Costner. You may have heard of him. He shows up in the film with Rebecca De Mornay, no less. Yeah, quite interesting. Oh, and it had Mako from Conan the Barbarian in it. That was more the low-budget version of Nuclear Terror. Whereas, the day after, it had Nicholas Meyer, the guy who made Star Trek 2. Of course, that's going to be a good movie. And Threads. Yeah, we'll get back to Threads in a second. But this goes back to this idea of War of the Worlds, where we have some sort of external, overwhelming physical force that utterly annihilates everything. And is that not an enduring fear to this day? Now, what's the origin of this threat? Well, it could be another nation now, but imagine if this was an entirely external power, something that may have come from a different reality or a land that we're not even aware of. Now, is that just paranoia? Was Admiral Byrd just saying things? Or were there connections that were being made? Or was he actually talking about the Cold War? I mean, you can really flip it any way you want to, and we don't know because can't talk to Admiral Byrd anymore. He's long gone. It'd be cool. Yeah, I'd actually like to talk to Admiral Byrd. I'd like to actually hear what he has to say. And yes, I'm well aware of his affiliations. I would still like to hear what he has to say. I think it would be interesting. There's a lot of people I'd like to talk to. James Forrestal being another one. And maybe just by talking to them directly, you can get an idea of what's going on. Or maybe, just maybe, they were just as clueless as we are in terms of the reality behind it. They had their suspicions, they had their inclinations, they may have acted on them, they may not have. Or they may have simply stayed between the lines because they felt that was the best course of action. They didn't want to rock the boat, so to speak. We just don't know. That's the trouble. They look like biological AT-AT walkers. Oh yeah, the original concept of the AT-AT walker. All-terrain, armored transport. Yes. Something, never mind, I'm not going to go down that road. But yeah, they do, don't they? But looking at other concepts of this external-internal threat, it is something that you'll find in a lot of the interesting science fiction artwork of the 1970s. It appears a lot. And I actually appreciated that artwork because there was a lot more of a human element. Now, look, I'm not someone who's against all computer-generated art. It's just it gets a little repetitive, and I like the human element being in things. But that's just me. You make of it what you will. We also see examples, though, of this terrifying conflict in the past on some of these columns, and indeed some of these elaborate inscriptions or statues or pillars or whatever you want to call them. We've got different names for them, but they do seem to show some sort of ferocious struggle going on. Now, of course, we'll be told this is merely showing the conflict at the time. This is the Dacian War. This is this conflict, that conflict, with all the wars that Rome fought or whoever fought, that the ancient empire of so-and-so fought, and they were just commemorating it. Sure, they were. Nobody builds columns like this today, even though our conflicts are very terrifying and involve horrific weapons. The media never stops to assure us of how terrifying these weapons are. You could pull up your phone right now and get all the accounts of how terrifying modern weapons are. But oddly enough, when you look at these things, you see suffering and destruction beyond your wildest dreams on these old columns. Very fascinating, isn't it? Adventurous. Yeah, I suppose so. Maxwell looks like a party. Yeah, I guess some people might call it that. Jamie, it sure is. Yes. Very true, Jamie. Very sure. Very true. Jory, there's a game series, Ico, Shadow of the Colossus, and The Last Guardian that alludes to a lot of what this community studies. Absolutely right. There's actually a lot of games that get away with alluding to a lot of things the community studies. You're right. I could go back to classic Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross, really go back in the day. Because much like with science fiction, people weren't paying as much attention to video games. I mean, we just played them, but we didn't really think, what's really the meaning behind these plots? Why do we have airships all the time? Why do we see crystals all the time? I don't know. It's just cool. It's fantasy. Yeah, embrace it. Adam, do you think there's a communication between the narrators and the ancient enemy? I think there's an influence, but I don't believe there's a direct communication. My perception on it is that why ever directly communicate with anyone about anything if you don't have to? Or if you don't have to put yourself on the game board, then why? When you can just move pieces and be completely safe from the effects. It's another way to look at it. So, there you go, Carrie. Nothing new. Ooh, Isabella, Lawnmower Man. To touch God is to feel God, for God is God. Or excuse me, to feel good, for God is God. It's great quote there. A lot of good quotes there. And if you're going to watch the original Lawnmower Man, I strongly suggest the director's cut. And Pierce Brosnan was great in the film, as was Jeff Fahey. Yeah, wonder whatever became of Jeff Fahey. He was a good actor in the day. So, but you see these examples of these external threats, and of course, from the Call of Cthulhu and the Cthulhu mythos, you have these seances, these esoteric rituals that were brought about to summon the old ones, believing that having the old ones present in the physical world would give you some sort of overwhelming power. And maybe that's actually an allusion to how this ancient enemy came back and really was able to manifest itself in our reality and interface with a lot of us. Now, when you consider the account of the Shrike from the Hyperion Cantos, there you have a distant future AI civilization that actually sends things back to the past to make sure that it can preserve itself. The whole point of the cruciforms, the parasites, is to make sure that human beings endure because the AI will need human beings to harvest in the distant future. So I guess in the Hyperion Cantos, the AI needs human resources. And the cruciform is its means of maintaining its human resource, if you will. I know that sounds a little morbid, but I'm just speaking in direct terms. Sometimes I do that. Looks like some new shirts I've seen. Chassis. Oh, boy. Oh, KC933. Yeah, the Hellraiser series. Yeah, Clive Barker. He's got quite an imagination. No doubt about it. Ugh. Paulie, the Hopi spoke of red, white, black dragons as well. Yeah, they spoke of a lot of different and interesting things. And I do have an exploration tab to do on the ant people. Coming soon. Not soon enough, I don't think. Rufio, thoughts hold weight. They do. And actions may hold even more weight. And so looking past it, if there is a cruciform, did it transform humanity? Is that really what it's about? Is the past linked to the future? Or there's sayings, what lies in the future is actually in the past, that we really are in a cycle. Is it the same cycle? Or is it referring to the fact that we're all stuck in this repetitive cycle? It's an infinite recursion loop. And I'll be honest with all of you, that's one of my greatest personal fears, and I'll just share that with you. I fear that we're stuck in an infinite recursion loop. It's rather frightening in some respects. But then you also consider the account of certain things, whether you're talking about the Warhammer universe or any account where biological beings give up their beings to be freed from death. Again, it's a recurring theme. And you might remember what we talked about when we looked at that. And are there illusions that this occurred in the past? That everybody was afraid of physical death and they were willing to do anything to get away from it. Name any ancient civilization, and there's all these efforts to escape physical death. We have to be freed from death. Death is terrifying. We don't want to face it. Yet, perhaps in trying to free ourselves from death, we actually confine ourselves to indefinite and eternal suffering. Isn't that the ultimate irony? Thoughts on that? There you go, Adam Bomb. Groundhog's Day. Oh, yes. Great film with Bill Murray. I'll watch that one if you haven't. That's a very interesting film. Yes, it is not impossible to escape it. The best way to control us is certainly through our fears. And, Paulie, that's the recurring theme that we see as well. Yes, Sky Sage, love is the answer. And what if I told you that maybe the hardest thing to do is to love ourselves first, because you have to love yourself to love others? Hey, Chad, good to see you. Hope all is going well. Fear is an illusion of self. We only fear what we don't understand. Look within to find what's without. Very true. And a great point. Sovereign, Invisible, and Traceable. I just returned from Phoenix, Arizona. I spent 3 days downtown. And I bet you saw some wonderful things down there. I'm still looking to cover the Southwest again. No doubt about it. But we don't know if it was an internal or external threat. Now, I picked this image very intentionally. I did show this image before when we talked about the great game. I want you to think about this being the way that the ancient enemy may operate, at least currently. That we and all the institutions that we know of are just pieces on a great game board. And the snake itself here, and it's a representation. Again, I'm not poking snakes in the eyes or saying all snakes are evil. It's just a representation. The snake itself is also on the board. So really what you see is the snake is a more powerful playing piece on the board. Look at it that way. But you don't see who's actually moving the pieces on the board. The ancient enemy is that which you do not see. Who's actually moving the pieces on the board? Because how many people just simply take the cards that they're dealt and go with it? I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to question authority. I'm just going to do what I'm told. So when someone moves me from point A to point B, I just do it. When I'm the snake and someone tells me to eat 7 pieces, I eat the pieces and I enjoy it. Yeah, it could really well work that way. And, what do people fear? Well, they only fear the snake because they think, well, the snake's the terrifying thing. It's got all the power, so I'm afraid of the snake. I'm not even aware of that which I don't see, even though that's what I'm supposed to be afraid of, but I'm not aware of it, so I don't even think about it. I only think about what I can see. But what I fear is that which I can see when I don't know what it's going to do. Maybe the snake will just sit there and look ominous, but not do a thing and let me live out my life. It's an analogy, but I think it's an accurate one. What are your thoughts on the game board analogy? Oh, that's a good one. Why would a snake have so much power? It does not have any hands, feet, or arms, or legs. Pretty much useless. Well, I guess it depends on your perspective, doesn't it? Ah, there you go, Inferno. Out of sight, out of mind. Ooh. KC933, but blind people don't fear everything, do they? No. That's a very good point. That is a very good point. We might have to consider that one a little bit more. Some people are not as susceptible because they don't have sensory overload on certain things. Ah, Robert, wizard behind the curtain. Exactly. And maybe, here's a good one. Fear is an option. So very true. You don't have to feel fear. And maybe that's the most important thing at all. To be able to step back and actually just be aware of what's happening. Oh, JC overload. Without sight, there is no evil. That's entirely possible too. Hey, Queen Peachy Queen. Yeah, absolutely. What if I know Jacob is the tribal father? Am I also a snake? The tribe Dan from the Bible, I believe, is called that. No, I don't think anybody's a snake. But there'll be plenty of people out there that'll tell you they know who the snakes are. Won't they? But I guess you have to come to your own conclusions. And believe me, if I had a dime for every time somebody emailed me, messaged me, or told me they knew who the true evil was and who I should act against, I would have so many dimes that I wouldn't be able to fill every building that I have on this little farm, for crying out loud. Because, yeah, people are going to try to mislead you. And that wonderfully segues into the last portion of this, when we consider the external or internal threat. Did this ancient enemy appear in previous eras, and how did it appear? What did it look like? Well, I had this initially as a thumbnail, but I thought this was a bad idea because people tend to look at the whole alien invasion concept and see it a very particular way because we're supposed to see it that way. But what if in the past there was some sort of existential entity that had attacked in this way? And this is why we have this particular fear. What's worse, being killed physically or being transformed into something you don't recognize? Well, I'll leave that to you. It's a rhetorical question at this point. But if you look and read the actual Hyperion story, the Hyperion Cantos, you can see that humanity itself becomes stuck in this infinite recursion loop. It thinks it's evolving, but it's really not. It's constantly just going in great circles. And it's stuck in a great circle. Ah, yes, there is something to be alluded to when we say restitutor orbis. And I'm always amazed at how people misconstrue orbis for sphere. It's actually circle. But is the circle a good thing or is it a warning? Well, it could be both. What do you actually see when you look in the sky? Do you see spheres or do you see circles? I guess it's up to you. Look through a telescope and tell me what you see. Again, I leave it up to you. You are defiled by everything you watch. Everything nowadays. Not just what you watch, but what you hear, what you read. You could say that. Hey, New West Reset, thank you very much for that. And thank you, Space Fraggle. I appreciate that. Let me make sure I get that up. Thank you so much. And thank you, New West Reset. And thank you, the Ladderix, and welcome. I appreciate that. But I know this is a lot of philosophical concepts, and this might not be perhaps directly as interesting. Yeah, old Voldemort. Interesting one there. I know this might not be as direct of an exploration as just looking at technology or buildings, but we have to consider everything if we're going to understand it all and see how it comes together. Paulie, I come to realize that lies are told, whereas the truth is often shown, just up to our own perception. Very, very true. And it's true in ways that we can't even begin to realize. You know, we like to think that there's some sort of malignant or being out there that's working against us. It may not be that way at all. And in fact, the last part of the ancient enemy might be looking at the most terrifying realization that the ancient enemy is actually within us. It actually is the potential of all of us. As Tolkien called it, the new shadow is within all of us. And maybe that's what really happened in the past. Maybe that was the real reason those previous civilizations fell. No matter how long they really existed, whether it was for what we think of as thousands of years or millions of years, the real reason they fell is because they were corrupted from within and they tore themselves apart. And yet, at the same time, people will tell us that we need to adhere to authority at all times because you may be corrupted from within. Again, it's playing on fear. It's really hard to say. Now, I'm going to go back here, and you might remember the TV series Rome from HBO before HBO decided to go the direction of Game of Thrones. This was in the mid-2000s. Interesting TV series, only on for 2 years, but I think of the example of the newsreader, portrayed by actor Ian McNeice, and I will admit I always appreciated Ian McNeice's Baron Harkonnen. I thought he did a good job in the sci-fi miniseries. Nobody can beat Kenneth McMillan, but that's just my opinion. Take it or leave it. And nothing against the most recent version. I just think that the character, they tried to make it more into a Colonel Kurtz character. And, Baron Harkonnen, I always thought he was supposed to be bellicose. But anyway, how many people act as the newsreader? The newsreader in Rome just took the news that he was given and read it in a very loud and commanding voice. And that's all he did. Now, I want to ask you, how many people are just simply newsreaders in their lives? They just take what they're given and they read it, or they take what they're given and they do it. And are people comfortable with doing that? And if they are comfortable with doing that, then why? Watched it while on deployment. Yes. Probably a good series to binge watch since it was only 2 seasons, huh, Lane? Oh, there you go, Jamie. Yeah, the town crier. Homer Simpson was also the town crier back during the golden age of The Simpsons. Just reading stuff. And it doesn't matter what it says, because if you watch the series, at one point in time, he's reading stuff on behalf of Gaius Julius Caesar, and at other times he's reading stuff on behalf of Pompey. So it doesn't matter who's in power. He's just going to take what he's given and read it. And even if it contradicts everything that was said the previous day, and there's actually a great example of it. So, Space Fraggle, just a little spittle. Yeah, we don't need to be talking about that scene, Space Fraggle, but yeah, good example. But, how many people just simply repeat what they say? Or, I always liked how they had Kent Brockman. Democracy just doesn't work. I've said it once, I've said it before. Shane, mainstream media, very believable still today. Yeah, it still works the exact same way. Perhaps you're familiar with the concept of the mainstream lauded broadcaster. And that's exactly what you have here with the town crier or the newsreader from the Rome TV series. That's all it is. Somebody that you trust because it's the same person. Now, this guy, we'll just call him Ian because that's the name of the actor, but the newsreader, the character was never given a name in this story. We don't know if he's a good guy or he's a bad guy. He just does his job. That's all he does. How many people just do their jobs? And as a result of doing their jobs, they enable so many things to happen because they never question anything. You might recall we've talked about the 48 Laws of Power written by author Robert Greene, and I'm not picking on Robert Greene because if he didn't write this book, I guarantee you somebody else would write this book. Now, ostensibly, this book is about the 48 laws of power. But I think, to more accurately describe it would be to say it's the 48 laws of adhering to power. Because law one, you might see here, with the chicken, how fortuitous, never outshine the master. That's law one. So whatever comes first is most important. So everything else does not supplant or overcome law one. Never outshine the master. Why? Because you will never be the master. Someone else will always be the master. And in fact, if someone else is always the master, you will never be the master of yourself. So what's Robert Greene done? He's written a book that tells you how to be a great middle manager, or how to just basically be the town crier. Read what's given to you and don't question it. And how many of us do that? And yes, I will admit, I am guilty of it. I did it for years. I did it for decades, in fact. I just read what was given to me and I didn't question it. And yeah, there were many times I despised myself for doing so. There were many times when I thought, this is wrong. Why am I doing this? Why am I not questioning this? Have we been there? Have we all been there? Oh, there you go, Sean P. Yeah, that's a direct way to say it. 6. Yes. Serving power. Ever so true. Or Jamie says it another way. Yes. How to be a complete TWAT. Yes. Oh, no. It's quite all right. It's quite all right because you know what? It's true. And I'm not afraid to admit that it was true. I'd like to think that I've moved on. Well, it's Robert Greene is a good writer. And you know what? He makes a lot of great points. I'm not denying that. But like I said, if he didn't write that book, somebody else would have. Somebody else would have written that book because guess what? For every sort of professional that you have, for example, we get a lot of military references on this channel for some reason. You have the official military regulations, and then you have the unofficial Army Officer's Guide, which tells you all the unofficial rules, like know your boss. And when your boss says something that he would like something, it's basically to be taken as an order, and you better do it. Because if not, your OER is going to suffer. If you ever saw Last of the Mohicans, you might remember Major Duncan Hayward. And of course, I'm talking about Last of the Mohicans from 1992, where he's told to regale what he saw in the massacre. And he says, I didn't see anything at all that led me to believe that it was not just ruffians and bandits and it was not an organized raid. Well, of course he said that because he was supporting his boss. If he didn't support his boss, he'd get a bad OER. Yeah, I know. It's a very, very negative connotation, and not everybody's like that. But a lot of people act that way because a lot of people feel they have no choice. And on that note, please hit the like button and support the channel. I mean, you have a choice not to hit it, but, I'm asking you to nicely. But I appreciate all the things that you contribute because you help to increase my understanding. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm glad I'm not the news reader anymore. I'm glad I'm not doing that anymore. I'm glad I'm not just simply following instructions. Maybe you want to live your life like that. And you know what? I'm not going to stop you. I'm not even going to insult you or say anything because I don't insult people. That's a waste of time. Because you have the choice to live your life your own way. No, you could just say that it's a distant government military background, and there's two ways to simply compel people to do things. Speak louder and repeat. And that's all you got to do. But, that's commercials these days too. So, it's not just the military. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this different exploration because in conclusion, the ancient enemy does seem to be something that is within all of us, that perhaps the greatest vulnerability is within all of us. Now, is that to discount that the terrifying Lovecraftian entities aren't out there? Is that to say that there is not a threat out there? No. But I believe that those threats out there have no power over us so long as we are aware of ourselves. But that's just me. You ultimately have to come to your own conclusions. And guess what? It's okay. In fact, it's preferable if you come to different conclusions than I do. I'm not looking for followers. I want real individual human beings with their own thoughts because I learn the most when people have diverging thoughts. But that's just me. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this live stream. I've got the next 12 explorations already recorded and ready to go, and they'll be coming out over the next month. And I have the next 27 topics beyond that already selected. Thank you for all of your feedback, and that's what those topics are derived from. So I hope you all have a wonderful week, and your new year, whatever you want to think of it as, is starting off well. So thank you, and have a wonderful weekend wherever you are, and thank you for joining me. And this is Lucius Aurelian signing off.